Chapter 13, Absence. Chapter text. Clanging away at the anvil, Finn didn't expect today to be any different than any other day. The trio of blacksmiths, Gobber, Vidar Jorgensen and himself, had kept busy most of the morning and early afternoon with sharpening weapons and tools. Various customers had stopped by to drop off their wares and chat for a while, asking Vidar about his family, Finn about training and giving Zap an affectionate pat on the head, and talking to Gobber about the weather. Finn snickered when Gobber made a comment about the upcoming storms threatening to load his skivvies. Vidar shuddered in disgust, giving Finn a short sense of nostalgia. It wasn't long ago since he himself had been an apprentice, learning a lot more about Gobber than he ever felt necessary. Times were tough back then. Finn frowned, forcing the grim thoughts out of his mind and clanging on the anvil once more. He inspected the molten metal before plunging it into a barrel of water, deeming it acceptable. The Burkian sighed loudly, swiping an arm against his forehead. "Gods, it's so hot today." "Storms brewing," Gobber said, hauling a box of dull weapons across the forge. "I wager thou'll be waging war with Jotuns tonight." Vidar perked up from his sharpening stone. "Jotuns from Jotunheim. Aye laddie, the tales I could tell you." Quick, uneven footsteps sounded from the doorway before Finn's father pushed his way in, brow furrowed as he scanned the forge. Hiccup seemed concerned as he ignored the three other males in the room. Finn pulled the cooled weapon out of the barrel. "Looking for something? Is your sister here?" The redhead raised a brow in confusion before replying, "Yeah, she's in the back." Confusingly, relief split across his father's face. "Really?" "No." Finn turned away, snickering. "Dad, this is Anna we're talking about, right? When does she ever come to the forge, much less hang out inside it? Have you seen her at all today?" Finn frowned, pausing in his work. "No, I haven't actually." "Why?" He fiddled with the metalworking for a minute before turning back to his dad. Hiccup stood in the doorway, hands on his hips, worrying his lip. Finn stopped messing with the parts. A silent hiccup was never a good thing. "Dad." Hiccup faced them again. "Nobody's seen her all day. She was supposed to be somewhere at 10, but they said she was sick. But she's not at home, or with Eric or Cliff." He tapered off, worry working its way into his voice. Finn tried to rid his voice of impatience when he said, "I'm sure she's just out flying." "Have you seen Lily?" "No." "Well then, there you go. She didn't take her new flight suit." "So?" Finn shrugged. "That doesn't mean she can't fly without it." "Yeah, but," Hiccup sighed. He held up his hands. "You're right. You're right. It's nothing. She'll show up here somewhere and all of this will be for naught." He turned toward the door. "Dad." Hiccup turned back, eyebrows raised. Breathe. Breathe, yes, thank you for that." Hiccup tried for a sarcastic smile. "I'll try to keep that at the top of my list of things to remember to do today." Finn snorted as his dad walked out. Zap cooed at him curiously before snuffling along the ground. The teenager wondered at the situation, why his dad was so worried. Adriana was known to disappear for hours at a time. Sometimes she'd be reading in a meadow with Lily at her side, sometimes she'd be sitting at the highest watchtower gazing at the ocean. The library, the beach, her room, hers and Eric's special fairyland they used to hang out at ages ago, you name it. Point being, his twin sister had tons of hiding places. Not having a lot of friends when she was younger meant lots of sanctuaries and favorite places. She'd pop up somewhere soon. When Finn got off work at 5 and flew Zap to the Great Hall for dinner, he'd long forgotten about his father's worry. Storm clouds brewed along the horizon, causing the already humid air to crackle with electricity. The wind smelled of ocean and rain. Tired from a long day's work, he was ready to sit down to a large bowl of stew and ale. Gods, he was old enough to drink ale now. Legally, and hang out with his friends until it was time to hit the hay. However, the second he opened the great hall doors, he was bombarded by Cliff and Eric. "Bruh," Cliff said, grabbing his shirt lapels and giving him a hearty shake. "Have you seen Annabelle?" Finn shook his friend's hands off and straightened his shirt. "Did you guys check the library?" "Yes." "The watchtower?" Yes. Both of them. Yes. Cliff exclaimed. Eric stood beside him, teal eyes taking in every detail of the room with a single glance. We checked the woods, twice, we checked every street and side street, every barn. Basically Eric interrupted. We've checked everywhere and we can't find her. Finn rolled his eyes. Guys, you're freaking out over nothing. She's probably... Where, Finn? Eric asked, gaze smoldering. We've been searching for 3 hours. Your parents have been looking for 6. Reality kicked in at those words. Finn frowned. What? You didn't see her this morning? Eric asked. No, I'm always out the door before she is. Finn racked his brain, wondering if he was forgetting something. Realization dawned on him. Wait, where are my parents? The boys turned a glance toward the head table where Hiccup and Astrid were surrounded by most of the council. Anybody you don't see is out looking for her. Finn resisted the urge to sigh. Look, I get it, nobody has seen her all day. And, based on everything that's happened to us kids, especially Anna. I get it. My parents are easily worried. But what if she really just took a long flight on Lily and hasn't come back yet? Eric opened his mouth to argue, but Finn cut him off. No, what if that's all this is? She was jumping off Lily from less than 1,000 feet in the air just a few days ago. Cliff shook his head, bouncing from foot to foot. I don't know brah, this isn't like Anna to be gone this long. Finn frowned. She's still coping from the breakup. Granted, not the best way to cope but, give her a break. No, we can't afford to give her a break. Eric insisted. This is serious. Why? Finn asked, losing patience. What could possibly happen? Cliff turned a nervous look at Eric, who stared at Finn unblinkingly. The longer the silence, the more Finn got the feeling he was missing something. Unfortunately, his parents broke the spell before he could ask any further questions. Hiccup and Astrid marched toward the door, Snotlout and Heather on their heels. Finn overheard Snotlout telling them not to worry, they'd keep looking. He left his friends and trotted after his parents before they could take off on their dragons. Hey! Hiccup looked down at him in agitation. You're sure you haven't seen Addie? No. If I had I would have told you earlier. Finn said, the wind whipping his hair against his scalp. Instinctively, he raised a hand to the right side of his face to cover the slave mark, in case it was visible. What do you want me to do? Astrid patted Stormfly's flank when lightning crackled across the sky. Come home with us. Boys, you too. Finn noticed Eric and Cliff standing behind him. They nodded and trotted to Charger and Edna, who were standing nearby. Zap sniffed the air in excitement, the folds of her inner wings crackling. No stormflights right now, Missy, Finn said, hopping into his saddle and following his parents to their house. The winds buffeted the dragons, even Toothless seemed to be struggling. It took longer than usual, but eventually they made it to the Haddock house. Hiccup shoved the door open and ushered everyone inside. All right, I need you boys to remember the last time you talked to her. Hiccup announced as he marched up the stairs and into Adriana's room. Finn followed his mom, knowing his friends were right behind him. Eric and Cliff relayed the information as the 3 Haddocks picked apart Adriana's room. Finn wasn't sure if they'd even find anything. Spying her journal, he internally debated reading it. A few years ago he'd kill to read her journal so he could tease her about all the stupid things she wrote about. He nearly learned his lesson the hard way when she almost killed him. Wasn't feeling well so she wanted to go home early. She hasn't been feeling well a lot lately. Hiccup mused aloud as he rummaged through a desk drawer. Astrid pulled apart the bed and paused when a single sheet of paper fluttered on the sheets. Hiccup. The boys waited with bated breath as the parents snatched up the note and read it. And read it. And read it again. Their confused expressions didn't offer any explanation. Finn carefully stepped forward and reached out to take the note. Astrid let it slip from her fingers. Finn felt the guys lean over his shoulders to read it. First off, I want to say I'm sorry for everything. I've caused you a lot of problems and drama and I can't bother you with it anymore. I'm leaving Burke. Don't panic, I have Lily with me. Everything will be okay. Don't come looking for me, by the time you find this message, I'll be long gone. I'm doing this for you. I can't ruin your lives for another day. Focus on Finn. He's a lot more deserving of your attention than me. I love you all. Goodbye. Tilda Adriana. Finn lowered the paper in shock. Eric took the page, careful not to crinkle any edges. He stared at his parents, trying to gauge their reactions, decipher their thoughts. Astrid looked frustrated, confused. Hiccup looked distraught, confused. Finn was sure his face looked the exact same. For a long while, nobody spoke. Then, Hiccup asked, "Did any of you know about this?" All three boys shook their heads firmly. At least, Finn assumed so. He could practically hear Cliff's mane of curls waving back and forth with the ferocity of his head shake. Eric's hair wasn't quite so thick. The chief scowled, his fingers going white against his waist. This doesn't make any sense. No. It doesn't. Astrid said stiffly. Why would she just take off? Hiccup asked no one in particular. Doing this for us. What does that mean? Finn racked his brain for answers. He knew haddocks to be stubborn individuals who made rash decisions when emotions ran high. He himself had made many a stupid decision based off pent-up emotion. His sister had been acting weird the last few days and she'd been sick the night before. Something wasn't adding up here. Brandine. Hiccup said suddenly. Did she go after Brandine? No. Eric replied, quickly shutting down the notion. He's the last person she'd go to. Then where would she go? And why would she leave? Eric shook his head. I don't know. Finn watched his father face Eric fully, doubt written all over his face. I don't believe you. The blonde's eyebrows rose a centimeter. Because if you're so sure that she wouldn't go to Brandine, then you must know where she did go. Eric shook his head vehemently. No, I don't know where she went. Then why did she leave? Finn had never known Eric to hide things. He was honest and kind and calm, and in the end he'd been the one to turn in Finn for the gang fiasco. Watching his friend stare Hiccup down in this moment of crisis, clearly withholding information about his missing twin, made him angry. Would you stop playing around? Finn growled. Say something. Tell me where my daughter is. Hiccup insisted. I don't know. You know something. Hiccup yelled back. Whatever it is you're hiding, you're not protecting her. There is a huge storm coming and I don't know where she is after an entire day of searching, and you are not going to be the person keeping her from me. She could be hurt or worse in a storm like this. Astrid raised a placating hand to her husband, though the glare she directed at Eric could melt the flesh off a frost giant. Finn suspected she was merely keeping his father from becoming completely unglued. Eric, it is imperative that you tell us what you know right now. We don't have any more time to waste. Eric's jaw tightened. His arms were crossed tightly against his chest. He seemed to be debating whether or not to tell them something, which only drove Finn crazier. He was about to slap him when Cliff broke the silence. Eric. Tell them. The haddocks looked at him in shock and confusion. Tell us what exactly? Astrid demanded. Eric seemed to weigh his words carefully, calculating. I don't know where she went. But I know she would never go looking for Brandine. Hiccup crossed his arms. How do you know that? Because she's the one who chased him off. Finn frowned. Adriana, his small, thin, quiet sister, chased off a guy just as big and strong as himself. What reason did she have to chase him off? Astrid asked. Because he's dangerous. Dangerous how? Hiccup waved a hand impatiently. We're getting off track. I don't care about Brandine, I want to know where my daughter is. I don't know. Eric shouted. If I knew I would have told you already. Then why did she leave? Finn demanded. Because she's Eric stopped, whatever he was about to say frozen in his mouth. She's. What? Hiccup asked stiffly. Eric shared a short glance with Cliff. He inhaled and looked back at Hiccup. She's pregnant. Silence overtook the bedroom. Finn gaped at his friend, the words echoing through his mind over and over again. The words simply wouldn't compute with his missing sister. His parents stood rigidly in their places, incredulous expressions on their faces. Eric and Cliff stood in the center of the room, the latter fidgeting nervously as if waiting for an explosion. Finn looked at his dad when he heard his prosthetic squeak. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Eric's voice was level and quiet. "Of course not. Then of all the stupid things to make up, why? I'm not making this up, hiccup. It's true, Chief," Cliff said, his voice cracking. He flinched when Hiccup glared back at him. Finn's blood ran cold. The fact that goofy, dorky Cliff had the guts to say something so serious, so real. A soft exhale and he heard his father sneer, "I don't believe you." Eric's shoulders dipped. "Hiccup. I am going to ask you one more time or things are about to get very ugly," Hiccup said in a low voice. "Where did she go?" Eric sighed, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Chief, she didn't tell either of us she was leaving," Cliff insisted. "But you expect me to believe that she trusted you with that?" Hiccup shouted, making Cliff jerk back. Eric's head shot up. "Yes. She did." Hiccup's face turned a shade of red that suddenly reminded Finn of very dark times in the Haddock household. "Read the note again." Eric snatched the note from the bed and held it up. "Insert the context, it makes sense." Astrid shook her head angrily. "Boys, this is ridiculous. That's not even half of it. Enlighten me." Hiccup snapped. "I said Brandine was dangerous for a reason." Eric's words once again washed over Finn and he felt like he couldn't understand what was happening. There was simply too much assumption and speculation being thrown around. And they still didn't know where his sister was. But the implication of Eric's words about Brandine made him pause. "What did he do to her?" Hiccup asked Eric stiffly. Eric pursed his lips, but clearly Hiccup had no patience for more dramatic pauses. "What did he do to her? Was he hurting her?" Finn blurted. Eric frowned and opened his mouth, but Finn cut him off. "If you say no, I will punch your teeth out." "I saw the bruises." His parents whirled on him. "Bruises?" Astrid demanded. "When the hell was this?" Hiccup asked. "Just on her arm. And it was the day he left, after their fight." Finn pointed at Eric, the shiner on his face still visible. "I didn't notice anything before that." Astrid huffed. "Finn, why didn't you say anything?" "Because I thought you'd freak out. I didn't have any proof that it was actually from him and that he was gone." "You always say something when you have suspicions of abuse." "No exceptions," Hiccup said, directing his lecture all three teenagers. "Even if it's just suspicion. And for all we know it wasn't just." He stopped, his eyes landing on the note, face going slack as realization dawned on him. "It wasn't just physical abuse, if that's what you're thinking," Eric said softly. Cliff stepped back toward the group. "Enough beating around the bush." Hiccup shook his head, as if he knew where this was going. Finn looked between them in confusion, trying to make the connections. "Brandine raped her." Finn recoiled at the word tumbling from Cliff's mouth so easily. He stared at his parents, shocked and afraid. Astrid stood with shaking fists. "Are you sure?" Eric nodded sadly. "Yes." "When did you find out?" Astrid demanded. "Is this why you fought him in the Great Hall?" No, Eric shook his head. "She didn't tell me until a few days ago. I fought Brandine in the Great Hall because Because why?" Astrid enforced. Eric seemed to be losing his cool when his calm expression finally melted away into shame. "Because I suspected something. And I thought he was the one who hurt Cliff." Loud footsteps clashed in the silence and it wasn't until Hiccup pushed past Finn that he realized what was happening. And even then Finn barely registered his father shoving Eric into the back wall. "Why didn't you say anything?" Hiccup shouted. "Both of you." Cliff jerked back, genuinely frightened. Eric gulped. "Cliff wasn't supposed to find out." Finn finally found his voice, lacing it with sarcasm. "Neither were we, apparently." Not that that's important. So let me get this straight, Astrid said, her voice calm yet deadly. You two knew something about my daughter that is a literal matter of life and death, and you did nothing. Said nothing. The Larson boy struggled to maintain eye contact. She made me promise. Finn felt his stomach twist in disgust and anger. This isn't exactly a childhood crush kind of secret, Eric. She promised she'd tell you guys. Eric tried to explain. Hiccup threw up his hands. Well, guess what? She didn't. Instead, she took off and is gods nowhere, putting her life in danger, and apparently a baby's life too. Ever consider that in your grandiose schemes of keeping secrets? Even if she didn't leave, Astrid reasoned. How long did you expect this to stay a secret? Eric stuck out a hand. That's what I told her. Why did she even leave? Hiccup asked for the 100th time. I don't know. Eric lamented. She might have said something about shaming the family. Hiccup sighed, stepping away from the teenager. Oh my gods. I told her she didn't do anything wrong. Eric, let's just establish right now that you are a terrible friend and your word doesn't mean anything. Hiccup snapped. Because for this wise advice you gave her, it didn't make one heck of a difference, did it? Finn watched Eric's jaw tighten. Nobody liked to hear that his word was meaningless. I would have told you soon if she didn't. Eric said firmly. I know it would have been for her own good if I broke a promise. But I didn't know she was planning to run off. Finn shook his head. You're such an idiot. Eric scowled at him but chose to say nothing. The weight of the situation seemed to press on Finn once again. His sister was pregnant. She'd been, no, he couldn't even think the word. But he'd worked with that selfish pig at the forge every day and hadn't known. And now she was off gallivanting through the archipelago in the middle of a huge storm too. What? What exactly is she trying to do? Finn asked. Astrid shook her head. Run. Hiccup pushed his hands through his hair. I should have known. This sort of thing happens to someone in your own home, you have to be able to see it. What was I thinking? How did I not notice? She did her hardest to hide it. Yes, but now with everything that's happened to her recently, it's obvious. Astrid said. Finn swallowed. You mean the throwing up, sleeping later? All of it? Those are symptoms of early pregnancy. The floorboards creaked under Cliff's feet. Finn stared at the floor, thinking through all his memories. All the things he'd done with Adriana when they were little, all their little adventures. Growing up hadn't been easy. Both of them had almost been forced to grow up faster than the average child, and that made them wiser than most of their friends. Or at least, that's what he'd assumed. He didn't think on it proudly, he'd made many stupid decisions that had cost him dearly, most of which was his freedom. Why hadn't his sister learned from his mistakes, that taking off on a solo adventure is not as appealing or smart as it seems? Eric broke the silence. I'm sorry. Hiccup looked at him sharply. Spare me. I don't want to hear it. Then he met Finn's gaze. Saddle up. Zap is the only one who can track in a storm like this. Taking the stairs 4 at a time, Finn adjusted his new flight suit for what felt like the 8th time and ran out the door. He didn't have time to fidget with his new get-up, but he'd never worn this much tight leather at once before. Any other day he'd have time to adjust and gripe, but they were in a rush. His father wanted to leave in the next 15 minutes. He still had to saddle Zap and pack his saddlebags. The rain had officially started, so flying in regular clothes wouldn't be a good idea. He didn't need to catch pneumonia when he had a flight suit made for this kind of weather. Besides, he didn't know how long they'd be out flying. He had to be prepared, and fast. Zap was already prancing in the rain, both excited to fly in the storm and anxious to find her other favorite human. Getting her to hold still was a job in and of itself, but Finn finally got his dragon saddled. He managed to throw extra supplies and food in his bags. Once he grabbed his favorite dagger and strapped his axe to his shoulder holster, he was ready. He felt a smidge of pity that he couldn't indulge his vanity for just a minute and inspect himself in the mirror. He wondered what he looked like with all the get-up on. Zap zipped into the square with an excited roar. Finn noted his parents talking to the councilman in the center. His father seemed to be delegating jobs for the time they'd be gone. He noticed Snotlout, Fishlegs, Gustav and Horst on their dragons with saddlebags packed. If his father was willing to bring the big guns, then Finn knew this could get messy should they find his sister on some island in less than hospitable conditions. Finn slipped off his saddle and stood in the back of the group, listening for anything helpful. Nothing helpful seemed to apply to him that he didn't already know until someone announced that a single ship was missing from the harbor. Hiccup deduced that she must have taken a large enough ship to hold Lily. A few people questioned why she wouldn't just fly, as steering a ship alone through a gale would be even more dangerous than flying, but his parents dodged their reasoning and questions for her sake. Apparently they didn't want news of the pregnancy getting out just yet. Frustrated, he looked down and fiddled with the leather on his chest again, wondering if it was lopsided. A shoulder knocked into his and he reeled back. "Hey, watch it man!" Then he blinked at Inga in surprise. Stopping in her tracks, Inga scowled. "I am no man." "Well spoken," Finn amended. "Sorry. Spoke before I thought." When she didn't quip, he looked back at her questioningly. Inga seemed to be in a trance as she stared at him. Finn fidgeted uncomfortably. "What?" Her blue eyes shot up to his and, surprisingly, she blushed. "And nothing," she stammered. "Just, the suit suits you." Finn snorted. "I think there was a compliment in there somewhere." Except Inga stepped forward and unbuckled one of the shoulder straps, adjusting the length. So apparently it was lopsided. Great. Now he felt ridiculous and, okay, Inga was unstrapping his armor and straightening the leather. This wasn't awkward at all, was it? Or weird? Was it weird that she was fixing his armor? Why did this feel strangely intimate? Any other girl he talked to would just laugh at his lopsidedness. But Inga went out of the way to actually fix it. Was he overthinking things? There. Inga nodded resolutely. "Now you're perfect." Finn blanked. A smile tugged at his lips for some reason. He didn't know what to say and really he should be frustrated at this entire situation. He shouldn't even have to be leaving Burke right now. His family was falling apart at the seams again, and he was standing in the rain with Inga not quite flirting but almost flirting and feeling quite giddy about it. Finally, he thought of a response. "What's a little lopsided leather?" Inga smirked. "Expectations are high, fearless Finn. You wouldn't want to disappoint anyone with frumpy clothes now, would you?" "I don't know. The only one who seems to care right now is you." She hid a smile and looked away. Finn breathed a laugh, unsure what to say. His eyes fell back on the crowd, his good mood wavering. Inga seemed to notice. "So what's going on exactly?" Finn frowned. "I can't say right now. Maybe I can tell you when we get back. A lot of stuff came up." Inga nodded understandingly. She still looked confused and concerned, but she didn't press it. "Just, be safe out there. Don't do anything stupid." "Who, me?" Inga rolled her eyes. "Stupid? Beauty. Finn." Okay, he held up his hands in mock surrender. "What are you doing out here anyway?" "I brought my dad his saddlebag. He's been out all day looking for Adriana so he didn't have time to eat, let alone pack a bag." "Oh. That was nice of you." Inga shrugged. "To be honest, my mom asked me to do it, but I was happy to." "Finn." He spun around at his father's hard voice. Hiccup gave him a once-over, a flicker of relief in his eyes when he noticed the flight suit. "Run into the forge and get my sword." "Got it." Finn trotted off, but not before turning back to Inga. "Hey, thanks. I'll talk to you when I get back, I guess." Inga genuinely smiled. "I look forward to it." They parted ways, Inga going back to her house and Finn running into the forge. He shook his hair around, flinging droplets everywhere. "Sword, sword, sword. Ah!" He saw his father's sword across the room on a work table and bounded forward. He heard uneven footsteps in the doorway as he picked it up, assuming the new arrival was his dad. "Got it right here." Finn froze when he turned and saw Eric standing in the doorway, blonde hair plastered against his forehead and wavier than usual with the humidity. The haddock scowled. "What do I want?" "Finn." He marched toward the door. "I don't have time for this, Eric. I haven't even said anything yet." "Haven't you said enough already?" Finn whirled on him. "My sister is pregnant and missing and it's all your fault." Eric stepped back. "How is it my fault? If you hadn't intervened in their relationship." "I didn't!" Eric exclaimed. "You kissed her first." Finn shouted. "Don't act like you're the innocent party in all of this. The best thing for her would have been for you to just back off. Tell someone what happened and back off. Because just backing off has always turned out well for her." Eric said sardonically. Since the accident with Eric's leg, Finn had never wanted to hurt his friend more than in this moment. "You kept this from all of us. You knew and you said nothing." "I wanted to tell you." "I did. I never thought this would happen." "And then you roped Cliff into it. You made him keep your little secret, all safe and sound before she decided to take off." Finn honestly hadn't felt this angry years. Since the gang and Eric's accident and the last time he ran away, he'd worked hard to be calm in hard situations. He didn't want to be an angry, bitter person for the rest of his life because he didn't know how to handle situations. But this anger he couldn't control. Eric shook his head, damp ends of his hair shaking at his temples. "I did not come in here to argue with you, okay? You guys can all hate me for the rest of your days if you want. But I have never put anything higher on my list of importance than your sister. She is the only thing I care about at this point." "Right. I'm sure the baby has nothing to do with it." Eric frowned in shock. "What does that mean?" "It means that you, in all your compassion and wisdom, have already concocted this grandiose master plan to solve all of these problems when we bring her back, because you're so sure that we can clean up the mess that you started." "I never started all of this," Eric cried. "Has it occurred to you that this is my family we are talking about? My sister?" Finn lifted his dad's sword, still sheathed, into Eric's face. "My dad told me to get his weapons. My dad never raises a finger against another person, let alone a weapon. I hope you're prepared for what he might do to anybody that lays a finger on her out there. Because there might be some bloodshed. Or heck, what he's going to do to you and Cliff if we find her dead body somewhere. I hope you're a fast runner because there won't be a hiding place good enough for you. And just to think that, hey, you could have prevented all of this by just pulling my parents aside and saying, hey, I have to tell you something. How simple that could have been. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to be Mr. Goody-Two-Boots and keep your little pinky promise." Eric stood with arms crossed through Finn's entire rant with a stoic expression. The calm demeanor made Finn want to pitch another fit, but he realized his father would be growing impatient when he noticed Finn's absence. "Just bring her back," Eric finally said. "Assuming we can even find her. Because from the looks of the note, she doesn't want to be found. We'd have a hard enough time without a storm." Thunder accentuated his comment like a hammer driving a nail into wood. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have to find my sister." Finn shoved past Eric to the door. He didn't look back. Finn marched into the rain, which had begun to fall more ferociously than when he'd spoken to Inga. All the light-heartedness from their conversation had left him, replaced by anger and fear and frustration. He didn't know where or when or even if they'd find his small sister. But if he knew anything, it was that his parents would never stop looking. If that meant searching every village through the archipelago, they'd do it. They'd gone through so much for both of their kids, he knew this to be true on so many levels. He knew what it was like to run in fear from his problems. He'd run away from his parents before, looking to save them from the embarrassment, the shame, the burden of his mistakes. But his parents had never given up on him even with those mistakes hanging over their heads like rain clouds. So he knew, without a doubt, that his parents would seek out their lost daughter with everything they had, not only because they loved her, but also because she was innocent. She'd done nothing wrong except lie and hide the truth from them. She'd made it worse by running away. One way or another, they would find her. They were stubborn haddocks after all. Adriana was honestly surprised she'd made it this far. A few fibs here and there, people would get confused about where she was when she didn't show. People would tell her parents she was to be somewhere at one time, others would say a different place at a different time. The fact that she was punctual in her arrangements made her hard to forget. People would notice when she didn't arrive on time. But the more they scratched their heads in confusion gave her more time to get away. She knew the danger in flying, she didn't want to risk the baby's life. She'd tried to think of some way off the island other than Lily. The only other way was by boat. Adriana didn't know if she could honestly sneak a boat out of the harbor without getting caught, but upon closer inspection there was only one guard, and he was fast asleep in his chair. She knew she'd only have a few minutes, so with the help of Lily, they'd sneaked onto the smallest ship they could find that could still hold Lily comfortably. Just because she couldn't fly didn't mean she would leave her dragon behind. She needed some protection out there. It took some time and lots of fearful glances behind them to make sure they weren't being followed, but eventually Burke was a tiny dot on the horizon. She'd packed all the necessary provisions, clothes, food, an emergency kit with cloths and a paste concoction they used for cuts and scrapes. She figured this adventure would come with a few boo-boos now and then. Lily helped her pull the ropes taut for the sails. They were making decent time, but Adriana knew once her parents found her note, they'd come searching anyway. Toothless and Stormfly, heck even Zap, could outdistance most dragons in a race. She needed to have at least 6 hours on them in order to really disappear. Adriana steered the ship, looking down at her map again. If her calculations were accurate, she would arrive at Bob Burglar Island by tonight. She knew Kamikaze to be very open-minded to women, especially young girls, who were in trouble and in need of a place to stay. She'd spend the remainder of the next 9 months with her, if Kamikaze allowed it. She planned to send a message to her parents at some point telling them where she'd settled. She hoped they'd understand that this is what she had to do, for them, for herself, for her brother, for her child. She couldn't make them solve this problem for her. She had to take care of it herself, alone. The only thing she needed was a safe haven. Lily exhaled a puff of smoke from her nose. Adriana wrinkled her nose and pushed her dragon's snout away from her shoulder, scratching under her chin. "We'll be there tonight, Lily. Don't worry." Her monstrous nightmare huffed unshyly. She turned a look back toward Burke, which had long since disappeared from the horizon. It was weird, being unable to see her home. Guilt ripped through her chest once again, but Adriana faced forward stubbornly. There was no turning back now. She had to do this. If she failed at this, well, then she really was a disgrace. Finn had gone on 2 crazy escapades in their 17 years of life, and while he'd made it back both times a little worse for wear, he'd returned in one piece. He didn't like to talk about either experience. But in a way, Adriana respected him. They were adventures under his belt. He'd come back from them and grown stronger as a result. She wondered if she'd have the fortitude to do that. If she made it to Bog and lived there for a time, after the baby was born, or perhaps a few years, would she go back to Burke? She could permanently live there and visit her family sometime. She didn't know if she'd give her baby up for adoption or keep it. Whatever the case, she wanted to give both of them the best chance she could. Even though she'd lived on Burke her entire life, sadly, she didn't see Burke as an option. It pained her to think so pessimistically about her home, her old home, but she couldn't force her family and the village to carry this burden. This was the right thing to do. "Come on, Lily," Adriana said finally, needing to hear something besides the waves lapping against the prow. "Let's see if we can find some fish." For a while they fished, hoping to catch some meat. Adriana had packed bread and cheese and some vegetables, which she could replenish at a market on Bog or some other island if she happened to stop elsewhere. She brought all the money she'd saved up over the years. She wouldn't take any of her family's money, even though she was technically an heiress by default if anything happened to Finn. Though their family didn't ever mention it out loud, everyone in the archipelago knew that the Haddocks had enough money to spare, as most chieftain families did. She supposed that's why her dad didn't try to save money with Rattray when he'd paid for Binnen. He literally didn't care. Adriana didn't know what to expect on the high seas. The occasional dragon flew overhead, the waves soothed her stress, Lily stretched out on the deck. For a while, everything was calm. Adriana leaned back against Lily and dozed off, forgetting her mission and troubles. A while later, Lily jerked with a growl of surprise. Adriana fumbled into a sitting position, a reprimand halfway out of her mouth. Lily, calm. Then she realized she was wet and the sky was darkening at a rapid pace. She stood on shaky legs, the ship deck bobbing up and down with chop. Adriana's eyes widened in fear when she saw the storm raging ahead of them. They were heading straight for it. Lily. Adriana turned and ran for the ship wheel and turned it to the right, trying to turn them around. Lily slid across the deck with the sudden change in direction, but she flapped her wings once to stay upright. Sea spray hit them as they changed positions, but Adriana knew it was futile. No matter what they did, they were going to be right in the middle of it. She looked at Lily with wide eyes. Should they take off? Leave the ship and fly away as fast as they could? She had a feeling that so close to a storm, they'd be sucked in anyway and Lily could easily be overpowered, or worse break a wing. Then they'd really be in trouble. Adriana narrowed her eyes at the oncoming storm. Our best bet is to stay on the ship. Lily growled indignantly. We shouldn't risk your safety in the air. If we can get through the storm, try to avoid the worst of it, then maybe we'll make it. Adriana yelled, the wind carrying her voice away. You're the only one I have left, Lily, and I can't lose you to a stupid storm I was dumb enough to get us into. Just, trust me. Even as the storm raged on, Adriana could feel the rumbling in her dragon's chest. The nightmare didn't like this situation at all. But she had trust her rider. Please, Lily. Adriana held out her hand. We can do this. I know we can. If my parents have done this 100 times and Finn has done this a couple times, surely we can too. If we die, you can drown me, okay? The dragon huffed indignantly before setting her snout under Adriana's palm. Then she slapped her tail on the deck once and roared at the oncoming storm, as if to say, bring it on. A fleeting smile crossed Adriana's face, but she turned back to the steering wheel. She gripped it tightly with both hands, unwilling to move. She glanced down at her stomach, still as flat as it always had been, but she knew who she was carrying. Don't worry. We'll get out of this. I promise. For a little while, they were okay. The wind ripped at the sails, forcing them to go faster than before. She was glad they hadn't flown at all. Lily would have been tossed around like a rag doll. A few waves towered over the ship's edges before cascading onto the deck, knocking both Lily and Adriana over. But the haddock girl refused to let go of the ship wheel. Eventually Lily left the front deck and stood over her rider's shoulder, nudging her back toward the wheel when she began to slip. Using her claws, Lily was able to dig into the wood and stay in one spot. Adriana's boots slid across the planks when another wave blasted the ship. The rain was so thick, she could barely see the deck. The waves were easily 40 feet high and the winds buffeted the ship up and down. The sky was dark as storm clouds billowed around them, lightning flashed and thunder boomed. Adriana briefly thought of Gobber's crazy stories of Thor fighting Jotuns in the air while his jester half-brother Loki caused mischief to spur on the fight. She'd never been in a storm, only her imagination could give her a visual on the experience. No imagination or stories could have prepared her for the terror she currently experienced. Lily. Adriana screamed, but found she couldn't hear her own voice. Hysteria crawled up her throat. She was a fool. How could she have not realized the signs of a storm coming? The humidity, the choppy waves, the cloudy sky. How did she ever think she could provide a better life for a child when she couldn't even get across the ocean? Lily seemed to sense her fear and pressed her closer to the ship wheel. Wrapping her wings around the girl, she tucked her in close and bowed her neck down so the worst of the storm was hidden from her view. Adriana still felt the rising of the ship before it would plummet down more waves. She still heard the snapping of ropes and tearing of sails, the pounding of waves rocking the ship. She waited for the ship to sink, when Lily would grapple to save her from the ocean's clutches, but would miss and be unable to find her. She waited to die in the sea, with nobody coming to save her. Maybe death would be merciful to life's horrors. It seemed like forever. She didn't even notice the lack of sound or the ship's gradual slowing of speed until Lily raised her head. Dim sunlight filtered in through the hole above Adriana's head. The nightmare lowered her wings and Adriana gasped. The storm was gone. A quick look over her shoulder proved that they had indeed made it through. The worst was behind them. For once, Adriana cried and laughed without shame. Tears splashed down her already wet cheeks, but she couldn't believe they'd made it. The laughter had to be from hysteria. Her hands were cramping on the ship wheel, her heart was pounding in her chest from the adrenaline. Her stomach twisted into knots and she slowly walked to the edge of the ship. Her arms and legs shook. Lily cooed behind her. She turned and nearly tripped into her dragon's chest. She barely had the strength to warp her arms around the dragon's thick neck. "We made it," she whispered. She didn't remember blacking out. Adriana woke up with a blanket around her shoulders. Despite sore muscles, she jerked to a sitting position, expecting her family to be standing around. They were the only people who ever put blankets around her when she was sleeping. But only Lily sat beside her on the deck. Her tail thumped happily when she saw her human. "Oh, you found this below deck, didn't you?" Adriana hugged the blanket tighter. "Thanks, Lily." Lily preened, raising her head high into the air. Adriana looked around, taking in a deep gulp of sea air. The sky was still thick with clouds, but she could tell night was falling. Apparently she'd fallen asleep with exhaustion earlier. She moved to stand, frowning when her boots made an uncomfortable squelch. Her clothes were still damp, only dry in random patches. Her hair was a frizzy mess, her scalp crusty from sea salt. She sighed at the thought of showing up to Bog like this. Adriana gasped. "Bog? Oh no. Lily, we're probably off course. I don't know where we are." Lily didn't seem fazed by this information. She stayed where she was on the deck, giving her rider a curious look. "The map is soaked, too." The girl scowled, marching to a corner of the deck and picking up a soggy wad of what used to be paper. Her father's handwriting had smudged, leaving the map confusing and useless. She dropped it back on the deck with a watery slap. "Well, that's just great. Now what?" Adriana sighed, looking up her ship. The sails were torn in multiple places. Any cargo that had been on deck was thrown around or lost at sea. Ropes were hanging in random areas, needing to be righted. She knew that would be useless if the sails were torn. She sighed again. "Good thing I didn't plan for a life at sea, Lils. I don't make a very good pirate." Lily chortled in agreement. "I guess, we'll just have to fix what we can," Adriana reasoned, walking to the mainmast and climbing up the built-in ladder. With Lily's help and encouragement, she managed to fix part of one sail within the hour. Her thick blonde hair got in the way, since her braid had come undone in the storm, her hair tie lost to the depths. She figured she'd have to make a new one out of some cloth when Lily growled in excitement. "What?" Adriana looked down from her perch, before following her dragon's gaze. Far off in the darkening horizon, she saw lights. She gasped, clambering back down the ladder as fast as she could without slipping. She ran to her soaked satchel and pulled out her spyglass. Focusing on the lights, Adriana's heart leaped. An island. Maybe it's Bog. Relief coursed through her veins. She couldn't believe they'd made it. Even if Kamikaze wouldn't let her stay on Bog, she would be grateful for a warm bath and a change of clothes. She felt disoriented from the storm and she hadn't eaten much the last few days with the morning sickness taking over her entire system, but she felt like maybe she could stomach a little soup or broth. It took a while to get close to the island with their ripped sails slowing their pace. But eventually she could see the shores and the village beyond. Her smile began to fade the closer they got. She'd only been to Bog Burglar Island once before, but she remembered it quite clearly. Bog's village had lots of double-stacked houses, which Kamikaze had explained were created for extra living space and training alike. Flat rooftops were used for training exercises and battles and daredevil escapes. Women lived together in groups with a leader in each group, and an entire house created a regiment of sorts. Multiply that by nearly 100 houses, and Bog Burglar Island was a formidable foe. This village looked a lot different. The shores were rocky and craggy, the port a little worse for wear. The homes were mashed together unevenly, the streets crossing in varying directions. Lanterns were lit on each porch and she could vaguely see people walking about, and she didn't see any dragons. Adriana was even more confused when a male voice shouted, "Ho there, stranger." She looked up in surprise at a man pointing a bow and arrow at her from a high watchtower. Instantly, she raised her hands above her head. "Hi. State your business." "I'm here to speak to Adriana," tapered off with a frown. Kamikaze didn't have men on book, she believed them to be less superior to women. So why would she have a man stationed as? "Speak up there, or you'll be shot for trespassing." "I'm here to see Chief Kamikaze." The man frowned, relaxing his stance on his bow. Then he snorted. Adriana watched in confusion as he guffawed, clearly amused about something. "Are we, lassie?" he snickered, wiping an eye. "You missed the mark a bit, Adriana lowered her arms. "What do you mean?" "You're clear on the wrong side of the archipelago, missy. Bob's about 50 miles that way." The guard pointed to his right. "What?" Adriana yelped. No, I just. That stupid storm. I got caught in the gale, did ya?" "Well, ain't nothing, just go on to the village, get yourself a nice ale and relax. I'm sure you'll find someone to hire to fix your ship." "You think so?" Adriana asked hopefully. "Yep." But the man chuckled, rubbing a few fingers together. "There's a toll price to enter Rune." Adriana's heart nearly stopped. "Rune. Told ya," the man said impatiently, waving his hand for money. Adriana reached into her satchel and grabbed a small pouch of gold coins. She needed to be careful with her money, as she didn't have much. But she needed to placate this man enough so she could at least find a place to stay tonight. She threw the bag up at the man, who easily caught it and inspected his pay. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, probably because it was gold. Not many young women walked around carrying gold, but she was a haddock. Her parents had given her and Finn gold coins a while back as a gift. Not that this man needed to know that. Turns out he didn't care, because he pocketed the gold and waved her forward. "Onward then. Dock your ship and enjoy your stay in Rune." "Thanks," Adriana said as she turned the ship into the harbor. "I think." Lily growled her agreement. They managed to dock the ship easily, without gaining too many stairs. Adriana grabbed her satchel, stuffed all her items of importance inside without making the bag too heavy, before exiting the ship. She'd never been to Rune before, but just looking at it made her nervous. She was glad Lily was by her side to protect her. She'd heard horrible things about Rune. Their chieftain was a rather lazy man, who didn't enforce any kind of law. He barely lifted a finger for all the terrible things that happened. Finn had been captured here and sent to Mayro on a slave ship. Instantly Adriana was on edge, unwilling to look anyone in the eye, let alone speak. But she had to find somewhere to stay, or at least find a hot meal. She'd almost settle for sleeping on the wet deck of the ship if she could find a dry, thicker blanket. But then she could get mugged in the middle of the night, or worse. Adriana shook herself and firmly told herself to focus. She wouldn't get anywhere if she overthought things. They left the docks and walked into the square. Adriana noticed right off the bat that there were few women or children out at this hour. Most of the individuals walking around were men, some in a drunken stupor as they stumbled past. She scampered out of their paths when they walked by, eager to avoid their stench and gazes. The street smelled of alcohol and filth, the stones grimy beneath her boots. She told herself that it was only her damp shoes, but deep down she knew it was more waste and gunk. She tried to breathe out of her mouth instead of her nose. The streets smelled foul. "Hey there, missy," a man crooned from a nearby porch. Lily growled at him, standing beside her protectively. What was with the men calling her missy around here? Adriana thought. She didn't respond to the man. She merely kept walking, avoiding eye contact. She had a feeling she didn't want to engage with him. "Pretty dragon for a pretty girl," the man continued. "I'd offer you 100 gold coins right now if I was offering." Adriana stopped and looked at the man in confusion. Her instincts told her to keep walking, but now she was curious. "What exactly would you be paying for?" "Well, the dragon obviously," the man tittered, stepping off his porch. Lily growled, wrapping her tail around Adriana. "Not very often we get dragons just waltzing into the village like this. Especially with a pretty girl." Adriana wanted to vomit right on his stupid face. Through gritted teeth, she said, "she's not for sale." She turned to walk away when the man laughed. "Too bad. I offered you a pretty good deal too. Guess we'll take her off your hands for free then." What Adriana started to ask, but suddenly a chain lashed out and wrapped around Lily's muzzle. She screamed when more men poured out of the surrounding buildings and threw chains over the monstrous nightmare's large body, tying down her wings and legs. Lily caught fire, trying to burn through the bonds, but Adriana saw the chains wouldn't even smolder. They seemed to be fireproof. It was over before it even started. Adriana was grabbed by the arm and dragged away from her dragon. "No, Lily. Please no, leave my dragon alone." The man who'd first spoken to her laughed and stepped off the porch. Adriana finally took in his appearance. He was tall, lithe like her father. That's where the similarities ended. His hair was dark, grimy with a floppy hat covering his hair, his beard and mustache drooped over his chin like he hadn't washed in months. His clothes were dark and tattered. Overall, he didn't look like much, but his eyes held a good amount of intelligence. "Thank you very much for your donation, my dear," he smiled coldly. "Like I said, we haven't had a pretty nightmare in a long time. What are you going to do with her?" Adriana demanded, pulling against the men holding her. The men laughed at her before they dropped her to the ground. She stared up at them, unsure what to do or what was so funny. "You're awful naive, you know that." The man sneered. "This is Rune. Lots of fun things happen here, all of which include capturing innocents for the slave trade, pirating, and dragon fighting." Adriana was very alarmed at how flippantly these words were said, as if they were no big deal. But the one most on her mind was dragon fighting. "No, you can't take my dragon. I think, my dear," he tilted her chin with a finger and a malicious eye. "You'll find that I can. Take her." "No." The men began dragging Lily away, who thrashed and growled with all her might. Adriana tried to get up and follow them, but with a flick of a finger from the apparent leader, two men dragged her in the opposite direction. "Lily!" Adriana cried hysterically, her still soggy boots slipping on the cobblestones. "I'll find you. I promise." The men dragged her dragon, her only family left, away until she was out of sight, while the men marched her back to the docks. But instead of dropping her on the docks, they pitched her over the edge. Adriana screamed and landed on her hands and knees, tumbling to her side to cushion her fall. "Do yourself a favor, dearie," one of the men yelled down at her. "Get back on your ship and go back to where you came from. The dragon's ours now." Adriana looked up at them with tears in her eyes. "But... oh, are you going to cry? Every sheltered little brat does." "True that. We're honestly being pretty generous to you, letting you go like this." The man smirked. "We could be having loads of other fun right now." Adriana's blood ran cold. Brandine had said the same thing once. The thought made her skin crawl and her heart pound. Bummer. It would have been fun. But alas, we have dragon fights to attend. Hope you enjoy your lonely trip home. The men laughed and walked off the docks, leaving her on the rocky shore. When their torchlight faded out, Adriana looked up and down the shore, wishing for somebody to help her. But she was truly alone now. And it was all her fault. Tears gathered in her eyes, she tried to breathe deeply, to keep calm. But she didn't know what to do next. She couldn't leave Lily to these monsters. She had to save her dragon. Slowly, she got to her feet. Her hands and knees were scraped, taking the brunt of the fall. Luckily it had been a short 4-foot drop. She'd read that hard falls could be harmful to pregnancy. Hopefully she hadn't fallen hard enough to be dangerous. Wiping her eyes on her sleeves, Adriana took stock of her provisions. She didn't have much. If the men wanted 100 or more gold coins for her dragon, she wouldn't be able to buy her back. Her best bet was to steal her back. She didn't know how she'd do it or what the men would do if they saw her trying to get in, but she'd gotten this far. She'd successfully escaped Burke with a ship, taken from under the very nose of the hooligan guard. She'd survived a massive storm that easily could have killed her if she didn't have her dragon by her side. Somehow, someway, she'd sneak into the inner workings of the dragon fighting ring and get Lily back. She was on her own out here with nobody coming as backup, no plan B, nothing. Just her brain and the provisions on her back. Escaping Burke had been no picnic, she'd been up most of the night concocting her plan. These men were clearly pretty smart, she just had to be smarter. With that, Adriana scrambled back onto the docks and sneaked into the nearest shadows, following the trail of footsteps and her dragon's tail etched in the dirt. Chapter 14, Speechless. Chapter text. Finn didn't like angry flights with his dad. After chewing out the guard who'd fallen asleep on the job and allowed his daughter to escape with an entire ship, Hiccup had stomped toward Finn and Zap with one of Adriana's favorite sweaters. Zap had snuffled it for a minute and began hopping around, clearly eager to find her missing girl. They'd fought the storm tooth and nail, but finally they'd gotten past it. And when they had, Hiccup and Toothless led the entourage at supersonic speeds. Zap did her best to keep up with the Night Fury. Toothless and Stormfly were as good at tracking as Zap, but without the shockjaw, they would have lost the scent long ago. As the waves blurred beneath them, Finn stole the occasional glance at his parents. Astrid stared ahead with a determined scowl, but he couldn't discern his father's expression because of the mask he wore. He could tell by the stiff shoulders and white-knuckled grip on Toothless' steering rod that he wasn't happy. They traveled on for a few hours, dodging lingering storm clouds and following the dragon's noses. Finn tried to calculate where they were going, where his sister might have fled to, but their flight patterns had changed course enough times that he lost track in his mental map. He'd taken to memorizing maps so he'd know exactly how to get to the different islands, should the need arise. Apparently he needed more study. In addition to his parents, they were joined by Gustav Larsen, Snotlout and Horst. The trio trailed behind the haddocks silently, scanning the skies for other dragon riders or ships in the water. Finn faced forward again, finding it difficult to see behind him in the mask. He wondered if he should have the eye holes widened to expand his peripheral vision. He was grateful for the suit too, it kept off the chill from the high speeds and winds, and he found Zap was able to fly even faster than usual. To top it off, Zap had excitedly shot some electric sparks into the ocean at the beginning of their trip and for once, his hair didn't stand up on end. He wished he could really see what they could do with his new flight suit, but that would have to wait. Toothless suddenly growled, teeth bared as he looked at the ocean. Hiccup, Finn and Zap looked down at the same time, and the teenager's stomach tightened. Is that debris? Hiccup said before twisting Toothless into a dive, straight toward the ocean. Zap and the other dragons followed behind quickly, slowing their pace when they got closer to the water. A few broken boxes and tattered sails floated on the waves. Hiccup stretched out and snatched one out of the water to inspect it. He turned toward Astrid and held up the cloth, a ripped hooligan flag. They hovered in midair silently, unsure how to continue. Finn felt the fear rising in his chest. Did this mean the ship had sunk? Did his sister survive? He wanted to think that she'd abandoned ship long before it sank. Astrid broke the silence. Do we still have a scent? Hiccup balled up the sail and shoved it in a saddlebag. Yes. Then let's keep looking. Finn still couldn't see his dad's face, but he could sense his distress. If they didn't find Adriana soon, he was going to lose it, and no amount of placating could dissolve that. Zap, which way? Finn asked. Zap sniffed the air before turning to the east. All right, let's go then. We'd better pick up the pace, Hiccup announced. It's going to be dark soon. Adriana hated the dark. Despite her complete distaste, given her lifelong experiences of dire peril, she found she could appreciate it in this moment. Being small and thin, she was able to sneak through the shadows and past even the most congested areas of Rune without being spotted. Funny, she should have thought of this earlier, before those jerks stole her dragon. There had been a few close calls though. Her clothes were too easy to see in the torchlight. So keeping an eye on her surroundings, she'd quickly bought a black cloak from a street vendor. The man had overcharged her by a ridiculous amount, and she knew she didn't have a lot of money to spend, but she was desperate. If she didn't find and save Lily, she'd be the archipelago's easiest target. She'd be alone and either stuck on this stupid rock, or alone and stuck in the ocean on her way to who knew where. She obviously hadn't been able to find Bog Burglar Island with Lily at her side. There was no way she'd ever find it by herself. More importantly, she wanted her friend back. Lily had been there since she was 10. She was the only one she openly spoke to about everything, literally everything. Even her confused feelings about Eric, before Brandine had to go and screw up her life. Literally. With a frustrated sigh, Adriana shoved aside her pessimistic thoughts and donned the black cloak. It was a little too big, just brushing the grimy cobblestones, but it would serve its purpose. Now, she was practically invisible. Weariness and hunger dragged her down, but she didn't stop. She didn't trust the food being offered at the sketchy street businesses at this hour. She just had to get Lily and get the heck out of this place. While skipping meals wasn't wise during pregnancy, when she already struggled to keep things down the last couple days anyway, she didn't want to make herself and the baby sick, or worse, because Rune was a town of vile, disgusting people that didn't know how to cook or clean or treat people kindly. Adriana, shut up, she whispered hoarsely to herself. Seriously. Shut up. She continued through the darkened streets, keeping her head down and wits about her. She honestly didn't know where she was going, she could barely see the footprints in the dirt anymore. So she kept moving. That's when she heard the cheering. She paused in her steps and listened carefully. It was still far away, but that was definitely cheering, probably from some sort of arena. She was getting closer. Excited, Adriana increased her speed to a careful run. She barely managed to dodge a few crates hiding in a dark alley. It was another 20 minutes before she found the dragon fighting arena. Luckily, Vikings were loud and obnoxious during any kind of ceremony or sport. Once she got close, they weren't too hard to find. The walls towered above her in an unfamiliar style of architecture. Adriana realized she'd have to climb a wall to get inside, which didn't sound safe or practical. Heavy footsteps echoed through the clearing. Soundlessly, Adriana crept back into the shadows and sat down, blending into the darkness. She watched as a few men marched toward a door that she hadn't noticed before. It was thick and rusty, built right into the walls. One of the men inserted a key and held the door open for the other man. "Oh thanks, Rolf," the man said. "You do see." Wham! Adriana covered her mouth to hide her wince. The man crumpled to the ground with a grunt, a door-shaped crease on his forehead. "Ow! Whatcha do that for, Rolf?" "You're as stupid as you are gullible, Leroy," Rolf stated with a chuckle. "Now make like a maggot and fly." Rolf cackled, slapping his knee before marching inside. Leroy got to his feet, brushing off his pants and retrieving his weapon. "That joke ain't even funny." "Yeah, then why don't you ever tell jokes?" "'Cause you ain't got any," Rolf said. "Now let's go. Gotta get the next dragons ready." The men retreated inside the arena, their conversation cutting to an indiscernible close when the door slammed shut. Adriana stared at the door, wishing she could have somehow retrieved the key before they'd left. Of course, she would have had no opportunity, and with no weapons to really make a difference, she wouldn't have stood a chance. She sighed, and whispered to herself, what would Finn do? Well, obviously Finn would have knocked them out. Same with Mom. But Dad? Her father was smart. Stories told of all the times he'd outwitted people to defeat foes and win hard challenges, even at a young age. They said he had to be smarter than his foes to make up for his loss in size, but she knew better. Her father was naturally the smartest man she knew. An idea struck her. Digging into her satchel, she found a few hairpins. Staring at the door's locks from afar, she wondered if she could still manage to get inside after all. She ran to the door and quickly began picking the locks. One of Eric's favorite books to read when they were young was about codes, ciphers and lock-picking. She wondered what he'd think of her right now, how crazy this whole thing was. Guilt riddled her chest for leaving and not saying goodbye, but she ignored it. She didn't want anyone to walk by and see her trying to break in. She'd mourn her losses at a less critical time. When the lock clicked in the silence, Adriana had to stifle her yelp of excitement. She pulled the door open and stepped inside, closing it behind her again with the quiet stealth of a night fury. The analogy made her smile beneath the hood, giving her courage. This entire thing was crazy. Finn was the adventurous one, not her. But the realization of how far she'd come that day gave her a rush of courage. She'd made it this far, she'd find Lily and escape Rune in one piece. As she crept through the darkened, quiet halls, She thought about Toothless. If he was here, the Night Fury would probably growl and drag her back into the shadows and lecture her in his dragon language that only her father seemed to be able to understand. She'd probably sass him back and end up getting covered from chin to hairline in dragon drool. She held in a sigh, willing herself to focus and not dwell on memories. They would only distract her from the task at hand. Voices echoed down the hallways ahead of her. Adriana fumbled in a panic for a moment before noticing a nearby door. She lunged for the handle and discovered a cleaning closet with old, dusty brooms, mops and buckets. She dove inside before the men turned the corner. Hear something? No. Coulda sworn I heard a door closin'. Adriana pressed back into the closet, trying to calm her pounding heart. She reached inside her satchel and grabbed her only weapon, a small dagger. She'd never been a fighter, she'd never been very good at hand-to-hand combat. But she knew from her last experience with Brandine that she had the guts to cause harm if necessary. For herself, for Lily, for her baby, she had to be willing to do whatever it took to get out of here with everyone intact. She couldn't afford weakness or screw-ups. The only place here to hide is this ole cleanin' closet. Now tell me, Leroy, what kinda imbecile would hide in a cleanin' closet? Well. Furthermore, what kinda moron would break into the ring? How exactly would they break in? What would be the purpose? Precisely, Leroy. They ain't and they wouldn't, so that means you're stupid. What? But, if you insist, since you're rude like that, I'll check anyway. Adriana's heart leapt into her throat as the handle jiggled. She pressed into the shadows as the door flung open. There now, ya see. Ain't nothing there, Leroy. How come ya gotta question my authority so much? I didn't, Rolf. The door slammed suddenly, causing Adriana to nearly jump out of her skin. That's enough out of you. Get moving, you're in great. Adriana heard Leroy's footsteps move down the corridor. Despite her fear, she almost felt sorry for the man. He didn't seem to be very bright, but this Rolf character was a jerk. Her grip on the dagger loosened when Rolf's footsteps soon followed Leroy's, but suddenly her nose began to tingle. Heart in her throat, Adriana realized the door slamming had caused all the surrounding dust to explode. She rubbed her nose violently, trying to prevent the sneeze from coming. But it would not be deterred. She shoved her face into her cloak, trying to muffle it, but... Achoo! The footsteps stopped in the hallway. Adriana's eyes were wide as saucers, silently cursing herself. Not 3 minutes ago she was nearly giddy with her good fortune for opening a door. Now she was a dead woman. She could hear Rolf and Leroy marching back to the closet. She stood tall, waiting as the door swung back open and both men stared into the black-shadowed closet with confused expressions. Rolf. Yeah. Is this place haunted? Should Leroy and check it out. Why don't you check it out, Rolf? 'Cause I'm the boss and more valuable. Leroy frowned but stepped closer into the closet. It was deep enough for the man to step inside the closet, easy enough for a girl her size to hide. But she could almost feel the sleeve of his shirt brushing her cloak. Another turn and he'd see her for sure. As if on cue, Leroy turned a look toward her and stared in confusion. It took Adriana a millisecond to concoct a plan, but instantly she let loose a war cry and tackled the man. Leroy and Rolf stumbled backwards with cries of sheer terror, probably more stunned than from actual fear. The men stumbled over themselves to escape her, which gave her just enough time to take off down the hallway and turn a corner. She didn't dare stop, since she could already hear them recovering from their shock. Adriana didn't know where she was going, she could hear crowds yelling from above, but didn't know where they were keeping the dragons. But now with 2 men on her tail, she knew she didn't have much time to find Lily and bust her out before they caught her or involved more guards. A weapons rack caught her eye as she ran past and she halted in her tracks. An idea struck her, she wanted to think better of her actions, but she had to try. There was no use running. Snatching a decent-sized club, Adriana took the next corner and waited. Pounding footsteps echoed down the halls, followed by Rolf's reprimands about Leroy's failure at simple duties. Adriana forced herself to exhale slowly. She waited until just the right moment when they turned the corner. Adriana swung the club upwards and clocked Leroy under the chin. The man went down with a hard thud and didn't move again. She made to swing again, but Rolf grabbed her arm and wrenched her arm backwards. She cried out in pain when he twisted it painfully. "Ah, what have we here?" Rolf snatched her underneath the chin and raised her off the ground by the cloak. The hood slipped down to reveal her hair and face, and the man laughed. "A little wretch. Whatcha doing in here, precious?" Adriana clawed at his arm, trying to get back down. Fear threatened to overwhelm her. She hadn't even found Lily and now she was going to be taken to a jail cell or worse. How could she have messed up so badly? "Hey!" Adriana and Rolf turned to the voice at the exact same time. She barely had time to register a flash of bright red hair before a loud twang sounded and Rolf's body snapped backwards. Adriana gasped at the arrow lodged in his shoulder. Rolf dropped her as he fell to the ground, a yell tearing from his throat at the wound. Adriana hit the ground and gasped, clambering away from the man. She turned a look up at her savior and nearly choked on her own voice. Finn. Finn, decked out in his new leather riding suit and weapons, marched up to Rolf, who lay squirming on the ground. She had to admit that he looked great in the suit, like a future chieftain. He knocked another arrow when the guard reached for a dagger on his hip. Don't even think about it." Finn kept the weapon poised, but turned a glare to his sister. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Adriana could only stare up at him in shock. She couldn't believe he was here. But that meant. A familiar growl came down the hall before Zap emerged, sniffing her up and down and licking her face. Okay, Adriana said quietly, rubbing her scales. "I missed you too. We've got to do something with them before more guards show up," Finn said. Adriana stood shakily. "Like?" Finn gestured to the unconscious Leroy. "Drag him into that corner by the weapons." Adriana swallowed hard. How could she tell her brother that she couldn't possibly drag a full-grown man across a room, not because she was a weak girl with no strength, but because she was pregnant? "I can't." "Gods, Adriana." Finn growled, dropped his bow and arrow and drew his axe. To Rolf, he said, "Make one move and she'll slice your arm clean off." To Adriana, he said, "You can handle that, right? All you have to do is swing." Adriana snatched the axe from him with a scowl. She ignored him as he dragged Leroy to the corner. "If you're so upset, then why come looking for me?" "Gods, not now," Finn said, marching back over and retrieving his weapons. "Save it for Dad." "Dad?" Adriana gasped. "He's here." "Yeah, let me knock this guy out so we can leave," Finn growled, raising his foot toward Rolf's face. "Wait." Adriana tackled Finn, causing him to miss. Finn couldn't possibly look angrier in that moment. "You are so infuriating." "I need him," Adriana shouted back. Her brother frowned, anger momentarily forgotten. What? What?" Rolf asked weakly from the floor. "They took Lily. Help me get her back, using him as a guide in this place, and we'll be on our merry way since I'm so infuriating," Adriana said levelly. "Gods, you kids are really annoying." "Shut up, Rolf, you don't get a say in this." "Clearly." Finn rubbed his temples. "I really hate you." "Likewise." Despite the harsh words spoken between them, Adriana felt grateful that he'd saved her from Rolf, and though he'd never admit it, she could see the relief in her brother's eyes. He'd been worried about her after all. Her brother snapped off the end of the arrow protruding from Rolf's chest and hauled the man to his feet. He groaned and winced when Finn placed a blade at his throat. "Lead on, Rolfie. Where are they keeping the dragons?" Despite his injury, Rolf managed to relay the directions as they went. Adriana didn't talk to her brother again as they walked, thinking of a plan. The second they freed Lily, she had to get on her back and leave Rune as soon as possible before their parents found them. She couldn't face them. Not here, not ever. Rolf directed them through the corridors with loathing in his voice. Blood seeped through his armored vest down his torso, soaking Finn's arm holding him up. Adriana realized that from the long distance down the hall, Finn had accurately pinpointed one of the few flaws in the armor and made an accurate shot. Adriana hoped he wouldn't bleed to death. She didn't want anybody to die, even if he threw her glares every few seconds. Adriana nearly jumped out of her skin when two guards turned a corner and saw them. They raised their weapons, but Finn held the knife tighter to Rolf's throat. "Call them off." "I can't, idiot," Rolf snapped. "They don't listen to me. Everyone in this building is stupid." Finn tilted the blade at a sharper angle. "Then I suppose you're expendable." "No, no, no." Rolf squeaked, his hardened exterior melting by the second. He threw out an arm to the guards. "Get out of here." "But should and go." The men hesitantly turned and fled down the hallway they'd come. Adriana had a sinking feeling they'd be coming back with reinforcements soon. "Oh Rolfie," Finn sang, pushing the man forward. "If you couldn't tell, we're in a bit of a rush. Mind speeding up the process here? Mind laying off my vocal cords, kid?" Rolf hissed. "Take a right." As they moved, Adriana couldn't help but admire her brother's control of the situation. He didn't take no for an answer and he talked to the man as if he was in charge. It was almost entertaining to watch. They turned another corner and Rolf muttered, "Third door on the right." "Thanks Rolf, you're a gem." Finn pulled the blade away from his neck and stepped back. Before Adriana could blink, Finn slammed the butt of his dagger into the back of Rolf's head. The man's eyes rolled back into his head and he crumpled. Adriana's eyes were wide as he stepped over the man and looked inside the barred door. "I didn't know you were so good at this. Guess you should have brought me along on your little adventure," Finn remarked scathingly, inserting his blade into the locked door. "There are dragons inside." She tried to look inside, but didn't want to block the little light Finn already had. She didn't want him to cut his fingers. Instead, she stood beside him with crossed arms and replied, "I couldn't tell anyone." "That's bull and you know it," Finn snapped. "I know I'm the king of taking off without warning but you should know better." Adriana huffed and ignored his comment. She didn't need his lectures. He didn't know what her reasons were. The door clicked and Finn threw it open, stepping inside. A dozen dragons were chained to the walls, looking hungry and sad. Zap crooned sadly but hopped away when a blue and yellow Gronkle growled at her for getting too close. Adriana scanned the room for Lily, but came up short-handed. Her dragon wasn't here. "Shoot." "Seriously?" Finn asked. "All this and that's the strongest word you can come up with." "Sorry, I don't swear when I'm upset, Finn," Adriana snapped. "Maybe I'll change my ways after this and act just like you from now on." "Commendable, but also not important." Finn moved past her and grabbed something on the floor, hiding in the shadows, purple saddle with bags hanging limp. "Lily," she was here. A large bang sounded outside the large room and both roaring and cheers could be heard. "The fights are out there," Finn said. "We've got to get up there." Luckily, their expected company still hadn't arrived. Together they ran through the halls with Zap on their heels. It took a few minutes of searching, but finally they found a door with stairs on the other side that led up to the arena. Finn scanned their surroundings before leading the way and looking down into the pit. Adriana's heart froze at what she saw. Lily was inside, fighting to get away from an angry, abused deadly Nada. She was limping, a gash on her front leg that bled profusely on the stones. Adriana knew she would be overpowered soon. The Nada shot spines at the nightmare. She managed to dodge most of them, but one managed to cut her wing as it shot by. Lily roared in pain and backed up against a wall. "We've got to do something," Adriana said over the noise. Finn wasn't watching Lily when he said, "I've got a few ideas." Like Adriana followed his gaze and nearly choked again. Her parents were standing 100 feet away talking with a man who looked to be a manager of sorts, probably for the dragon fights themselves. She felt herself backing up before Finn reached out and grabbed her arm. "Don't even think about it." "I can't go back, Finn." She pulled against his hand, which tightened on her arm. "You don't understand." "I do actually," Finn finally yelled. "I think it's pretty obvious at this point that you couldn't survive a day on your own. Look around, Anna." Adriana didn't want to. She didn't want to see things from his point of view. While she was only focused on her dragon, she didn't want to see what he was seeing. This was the place he'd been captured and sold as a slave, What sort of things could be standing out to him to remind him of the horrors he'd seen as a child? She turned a look at the crowds. Alcohol sloshed out of cups and spilled on 2 tiles. Scantily dressed women passed through the crowds and sat in the laps of drunken men. A fist fight erupted on the bottom level, all while a dragon fight was ongoing. She took a step back when her surroundings clicked and the smells and sounds all hit her at once. You need to stop focusing on one little thing and start focusing on your surroundings, Finn said firmly. Because that could be you. Easily. Adriana frowned. Which part? Finn sighed. The women, Adriana. They are pleasure slaves. She gasped, looking again. At the first look, the women only seemed to be out of her comfort zone. She probably would have avoided them before. But then details stood out, the chain scars around their wrists and necks, the bruises, the empty look in some of their eyes. Few women were free roaming. Adriana stepped back, blocking them from her view. She turned a fearful look up at her brother. Are you sure that's what they are? Finn's expression looked haunted. He didn't need to reply, but it was obvious that they weren't the first pleasure slaves he'd seen. Let's go. Adriana didn't want to stay here anymore. She'd never wanted to come to Rune in the first place, but now she couldn't seem to leave. She wanted to get Lily out of that ring as fast as possible, but she didn't know how she'd do that without her parents noticing. She'd have to find a way to lose Finn, if that was even possible. Ignoring her inner musings, Finn walked toward their parents. Zack pushed against her waist, ushering her forward. Adriana turned away from the crowd of gross people and followed Finn. When they were close enough to hear their voices, she froze. She could still run and hide, while Finn's back was still turned, before her parents saw her. But Zack would probably follow her. She was desperate to save Lily, and Finn's words scared her. She didn't want to be snatched up by some slave trader and have to relive her worst nightmare over and over again every day because she wouldn't listen. She was way in over her head. That's my daughter's dragon in there. Hiccup exclaimed, his angry voice carrying over the crowd. Where is she? As I've told ya, we ain't got no girls locked up. The man exclaimed, before pausing. Well, not any new ones. Hiccup lashed out and grabbed the man by the throat. His hissed response was drowned out by the crowd. All of this was her fault. She didn't know how she could possibly face them. She shook her head and turned to Finn. I can't. His look was incredulous. What? I can't talk to them, Finn. Help me get Lily and I'll leave Rune. Are you out of your freaking mind? Finn growled. You've seriously lost it if you think I'm letting you walk away. I don't want to walk anywhere, Finn. I want to fly. The crowd nearly drowned out their voices. She turned a nervous look to Lily, who was tiring fast. She's not going to be able to fly. Finn exclaimed. The only way we are getting out of Rune in one piece is by leaving together. All of us. It's not happening. I can't do this to them. Adriana cried. You're already doing this to them. Look at them. Finn pointed back toward their parents, who were still in deep conversation with the man. They're about to rip this island to shreds looking for you. They don't need me. Finn growled in frustration. He looked about ready to whack her on the head next. Please Finn, she pleaded. Help me save Lily and I'll go. Finn smiled and shook his head. Not going to happen. I'm not going to betray my parents again. Swiftly he grabbed her arm and walked forward, pulling her along. Finn, no, let go. Ignoring her, Finn yelled, Dad. Instantly, their parents whipped around. Finn pushed her forward, ignoring her glare. Found her. Hiccup released the man and ran forward, anger melting into worry. Addie. Are you hurt? No. He inspected the scrapes on her hands before pulling her into a tight embrace. I've got you. You're safe, you're not going anywhere. Adriana realized he was more assuring himself than talking to her. He patted Finn's arm as he walked past in a silent thank you. Dad, we need to get Lily out of there. I know. Hiccup stepped back, anger rekindling in his eyes. Go stand by your mother. Adriana stared up at him, solidifying her stance. She couldn't go back to Burke. Her dad started to see the defiance in her eyes. She'd never been very defiant toward him, but the resulting glare she was getting made her cringe. Hiccup turned and pointed toward Astrid. Now. Instantly she went and stood by Astrid, who looked at her disapprovingly. This is what she'd wanted to avoid. The disapproval, the anger. And they didn't even know the truth yet. Hiccup grasped the manager of the fights by the turtleneck and shoved his face into the bars. See that purple monstrous nightmare? Yeah, you've already mentioned this. She is property of Burke. Release her now and I'll go easy on you. The man chuckled and shoved Hiccup's hands off. Straightening his shirt, he said, Sorry Chief, but I don't take orders from you. If you hadn't noticed, we're on Rune. No rules apply here. Clearly. Hiccup replied, before making eye contact with Zap. The shockjaw lashed out with her tail and a burst of electricity shot forward. Sparks danced up the man's body before he collapsed in a shaking heap. Adriana jerked in, well, shock. He'd given that order without batting an eye and Zap knew exactly what he wanted. When could he do that? Finn looked just as surprised, while their mom and the other Burkian men looked on with smiles. Wait, when had they arrived? Adriana had only just realized that Horst and Gustav were standing nearby, while Snotlout sat in Hookfang's saddle watching Lily. All three men had glares of disapproval on their faces. Seeing Gustav made Adriana pause and look around more, looking for a certain blonde. But she came up empty-handed. Apparently Eric hadn't come. Snotlout, Gustav. Hiccup asked. Will you do the honors? With pleasure. Snotlout smirked, both nightmares taking off and hovering over the caged dome. Adriana watched on in surprise as the dragons hauled the dome clean off its hinges. It took a lot of effort and encouraging, but soon the dragons flew the dome away from the ring and dumped it in the nearby streets with a mighty crash. The crowds were soon in upheaval. Hiccup stood with crossed arms, watching the madness unfold. Horst, Finn. Clear the stands. Excitement passed over Finn's face as he jumped into his saddle. I've always wanted to do this. Zap and Horst's Gronkle took off in different directions, each spraying fiery shocks and lava blasts into the stands, scattering the crowds. Adriana watched the madness unfold until her dad turned on his heel and walked to the nearest stairway. She heard a door smash in before Toothless ran into the ring toward Lily. She realized he'd been scratching at the door trying to get inside this whole time. Toothless kept the deadly Nadder at bay while Hiccup carefully walked up to Lily with soothing words and an outstretched hand. Luckily she seemed to remember her rider's dad and instantly allowed him to look at her wounds. Can I? Adriana asked. Astrid sighed through her nose and nodded. She nearly ran down the stairs and ran to Lily, wrapping her big scaly face in a hug. I'm sorry, girl. She whispered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lily rumbled in response, her eyes only wide with worry for her rider. At least somebody wasn't mad at her. Then she jerked with a hiss and Hiccup winced. Sorry, girl. The wound on her leg was long and deep. Various other scrapes covered her scales, some of them flaking off. Adriana's heart broke for her dragon. She felt so guilty for everything and disappointed in herself that she'd come so far, but was otherwise unsuccessful. There was no way she'd escape her family and 3 professional dragon riders with an injured dragon and half-destroyed, stolen ship. This was a disaster. It took a while but Hiccup finally managed to wrap Lily's leg and get her out of the ring. They freed the rest of the dragons, which was a happy sight. But before long the Burkian troop had to leave the ring and get back to the ship. Adriana realized that they'd caused a lot of mayhem tonight. Fire still ate along the wooden benches above them, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. As they neared the ship, Hiccup waved the men and their dragons forward. Finn stood nearby hesitantly, unsure if he should stay for the talk or go on the ship. Before he could make a decision, Hiccup started talking. Now tell me honestly, if you can, Hiccup said. Are you hurt at all? No. Did you take any falls? The question sounded weird, so she frowned. I am fine. Hiccup sounded impatient when he said, it's not you I'm worried about. The statement took a moment to register, but when it did she took a step back. No. How could they possibly know? We know about the baby, Adriana. Astrid said, confirming her fears. What? She gasped. How? Hiccup almost sneered. Eric. Her face fell. Was he really that incapable of keeping a secret? Don't make that face like he's to blame for this. Hiccup snapped. You took off, what were we supposed to think? Obviously we would grill your closest friends for every bit of information. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Adriana glared at the ground, her emotions swimming. She didn't know if she should feel angry or sad. Why did you leave? Hiccup demanded. Did you think that we couldn't offer you anything? That we wouldn't help you? Her glare snapped to his face. I'm sick of making you take care of my problems. This is a problem, Adriana. Hiccup shouted, pointing at the town behind them. You don't understand a thing that's happening right now, do you? You're right, I don't. Adriana yelled back. Maybe I'm just too stupid to understand anything, unlike Finn who understands every little thing you tell him. Quit the pity party, this isn't about Finn. Astrid said calmly. Well, what do you want me to say? I want you tell me what the hell you were thinking. Hiccup shouted, his anger melting into something she didn't recognize. Rune, of all places. We thought the ship was sunk in the ocean when we found things from Berk floating in the waves. What do you want me to think? Hiccup grabbed her shoulders and gave her a firm shake. I don't care what the reason is, but don't you ever do this to me again. Adriana's eyes were wide in shock. He'd never grabbed her like this before, but it wasn't aggression, it was panic. He had a crazy look in his eyes that made her anger freeze. Hiccup sighed and pulled her into his chest, hugging her tight. You kids are going to be the death of me. Don't ever do this again. Eyes still wide, she could feel his heart pounding in his chest under all the armor and leather he wore. She'd honestly terrified him, and all of it was coming down at once. He stood there holding her for a few minutes before finally Astrid put an arm on Finn's shoulder. Let's get on the ship. We can talk more after we leave. Hiccup sighed and nodded, releasing her and allowing her to follow walk to the gangplank. She didn't look back until she heard her mom call Finn. Finn. Are you okay? Adriana turned to see her brother staring into the distance, down a wide street. He was tense, eyes narrowed in what looked like anger and fear. Hiccup stood next to him and instantly straightened. Resting an arm on Finn's shoulder, he ushered him toward the ship. Leave it. A muscle stood out in Finn's jaw as he brushed past his sister, ignoring whatever it was he'd seen. Hiccup helped her onto the ship before directing Astrid to take her downstairs to the cabin. I'll be down in a few minutes. Adriana gulped, hating every bit of this situation. Her dragon was injured, the ship was in shambles, her stomach was tied in knots. She hated to admit it, but she'd failed. She was going back to Berk with her family. Worn footprints adorned the floor of the boat as Hiccup paced, the steady stepping sounds the only thing anyone could hear other than the waves crashing on either side. Occasionally, one of the men above deck would shift or walk around, but their steps were muffled. Hiccups came in loud and clear, giving Adriana the distinct feeling that she was in more trouble with each footfall. Toothless watched his riders pacing back and back again, looking almost hypnotized by the steady motion. Astrid sat across from Adriana, staring at her axe in her lap. She ran a rock across its blade to sharpen it, and Adriana winced at the noise. She couldn't help but think she was going to be the unlucky recipient of its next blow. Finally, Hiccup kicked a crate, which contained some of Adriana's writings and doodles, miraculously still dry despite the storm. Even in her panic, Adriana couldn't help but think that she had chosen a very sturdy boat. What were you thinking? It would have been better if he had shouted. Hiccup's voice came out trembling and full of emotion. It almost sounded like he wanted to yell but couldn't summon the righteous anger. Adriana remained silent. Running off like that without even telling us, gods, what the hell is wrong with you? The footsteps ceased as Hiccup turned toward his daughter. Adriana had never fully registered the height difference between herself and her father until now. He had been so gentle to her, even when punishing her, that the 10 inches hardly registered. Now he seemed an immovable wall of anger and disappointment. Adriana had never been frightened of Hiccup before, but now she was terrified. She knew now why people all over the archipelago feared him. For the first time in her life, she wished he wasn't her father. You could have died. What's more, you could have cost your child their life. Hiccup's sharp green eyes bored into hers. Explain yourself. Please, help me understand what could possess you to do something so stupid and dangerous. I want to know. I was trying to get to Bog. Adriana's voice came through almost of its own accord. Bog isn't anywhere near here. Hiccup ran his fingers through his hair. Rune. Of all places. The storm blew me off course. That's another thing. You could have been killed. We didn't know if you'd sunk the ship and drowned. Adriana huffed a bit. I'm sorry, okay. No. You're not. I know when you're remorseful, and right now, you're being just as defiant as Finn used to be. Hiccup snapped, looking like he had lost all patience. What would possess you to do this to us? Adriana felt like her jaw was glued shut. Her puny excuses flew out of her head faster than water in cupped hands. Stranger still, she felt a tiny spark of anger within her. Hiccup didn't need to be so self-righteous. You don't understand a thing. Adriana said in a dead sort of voice. You just came here to get me without thinking. If you'd really thought about it. You're right. Hiccup snapped. If I'd really thought about it, I'd have realized you're an ungrateful little girl who doesn't appreciate a damned thing. Hiccup. Astrid spoke up for the first time. You don't mean that. Don't I? Hiccup growled, his voice raising. For years, I have done everything in my power to keep you safe. Everything. He pointed to the jagged scar down his neck. And what you did today spits in the face of all the love I have given you in the last 17 years. Hell, even earlier than that. Hiccup paused and Adriana noticed his fingers twitching. Was he shaking? And for you to just run off like that. To act like I would ever put my position or my pride ahead of your life. Your baby's life. Gods, you don't know me at all. But you failed. Adriana said through gritted teeth. We wouldn't be here if you hadn't. And you think that doesn't eat at me? Gods, Adriana, I'm so angry I want to tear this room apart, and it's not just because you ran off, it's not just because you endangered your life and my grandchild's life, it's because for all the efforts I've put forth, for all the times I've worked hard, harder than you could even imagine, to make sure this kind of thing would never happen to you. Hiccup's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried to continue, but his words came out shaky and more timid. It did. I still failed. And there he was. The terrifying dragon-conquering chief of Berk had somehow, in 7 words, turned back into her daddy. A broken man who had tried so hard and still done so little to stop life's horrors from affecting either of his children. He may have been successful in dragon training and saving the island from threat after threat, but when it came to 2 of the most precious people in his life, there were no heroics. No last-minute salvation. And Adriana felt pity. Perhaps she hadn't really thought about it until now. It was so strange, for all the times Hiccup had been moved to tears by the painful situations of either her or Finn, she hadn't imagined him being as ripped apart as they were by those events. And now it seemed to crash down on her. I really hurt you. Adriana whispered. She felt a sudden, strange tightness in her throat as she forced the words through. Hiccup turned away from her, his breathing labored. Astrid finally rose to her feet, placing her axe on the bench behind her. I think I understand what this is about, she said in a calm, almost soothing voice. Slowly, so that Adriana wouldn't flinch, she tucked a loose strand of her daughter's hair behind her ear. All these years, you've seen yourself as a burden. Am I close? Adriana nodded. And she placed her hands on the sides of Adriana's chin. You wanted to relieve us of it. Of you, she glanced down at Adriana's stomach, of both of you. Adriana nodded again, the tightness in her throat restricting speech. Hiccup had gone rigid, but he did not turn around. Astrid turned toward her husband, crouching slightly in front of him so that he would look her in the eye. And you, she said in the same calm tone, don't see it like that. We don't see it like that. It's been worth it. Yeah, it sucks when it happens, but that's being a parent. That's loving your kids. And it's not something we could even begin to expect her to understand. Not yet, anyway. Astrid glanced between Hiccup and Adriana for a moment before putting her hands on her hips. This is stupid, she said. You two adore each other and this has gone on long enough. Both of you. I won't have this tension in my house. I won't have Eric telling us important, crucial details of either of my children's lives anymore just because you've been too stubborn or proud to admit there's a problem. Hiccup turned around to face Adriana again, and Adriana was startled to see his eyes glistening with tears. She felt like someone had closed a fist over her heart and squeezed. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered, her voice too weak for a higher volume. You said once that if I let all this consume me, I'd end up alone and unloved, and I thought that meant there was a limit. That one day I'd screw up so much that there wouldn't be any more tolerance or forgiveness. Addie. I thought I was a huge, massive burden, the way I let Eric's dad die, and when Brandine wanted TT to be with me, I thought he was less serious. I thought that M meant something. I didn't know HED. I didn't, and then now I've ruined everything. Adriana's breaths came in gasps as a wave of tears streamed down her face. She buried her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the emotions she had suppressed for far too long. I'm so unlucky. I've always been unlucky. Even the G-gods have been trying to make sure I died as a baby, and then with Trista, and maybe this is why. Hiccup was silent for a moment before gently pulling her hands from on front of her eyes. Adriana knew her face must be red and splotchy, but he looked at her so lovingly, she felt a wave of relief. I never meant it like that, Addie. Never. Hiccup swiped beneath her eye with his thumb. And don't you ever say you're unlucky. I have never once regretted saving you all those times, never once thought that life would be better if you had suffocated 17 years ago. And you are not a burden. If I ever made you feel that way, I'm sorry. Adriana wiped her eyes, trying to stem the flow of tears. Hiccup stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug, allowing her to bury her face in his chest and cry. He held open an arm for Astrid to step in, and Adriana felt her mother join their embrace. They stood there for a few short minutes in silence. Now that she was safe in her loving parents' embrace, she couldn't imagine wanting to leave again. But this moment couldn't last forever, and the next conversation was inevitable. Hiccup rested his forehead on the top of his daughter's head and asked, "Do you need food or water? When did you eat last?" Adriana stirred, ignoring Astrid's fingers brushing out her tangled hair. "I don't know." Well, Hiccup stepped back and rested his hands on her shoulders. "Why don't you go with your mom, change clothes, try to eat something? We'll talk more in a few minutes." "Okay." Adriana nodded in agreement, some relief showing in her eyes. Astrid led her to the next room where she'd brought an extra satchel of clothes for Adriana. As soon as she saw the clothes her mother had picked out for her, she felt her eyes well up again. "Come here," Astrid said, putting her arms around her daughter once more. "I'm sorry," Adriana cried, her voice squeaking. "I know. We'll figure this out. But first let's get you dry and warm. One thing at a time." Adriana nodded and stepped back, wiping her eyes again. She felt her hair with a cringe. "We'll draw a hot bath when we get home." Pulling off her salty shirt, Adriana sighed. "That sounds nice." Astrid's smile was small as she hung up the shirt, turning her back to allow her daughter privacy. "I used to like hot baths too." She tapered off. Adriana swallowed hard, finishing the sentence on her own. "When she was pregnant." Pushing those thoughts aside, Adriana quickly finished changing and wrapped a thick wool blanket around herself. Instantly, she felt warmer. Yoo-hoo. She snuggled deeper under the blanket. Astrid smiled gently. "Better. I'll go get some bread and water." "K." Astrid walked out of the room and gently shut the door behind her. Adriana looked around, fully taking in her surroundings for the first time. It was a tiny bedroom, not even big enough for Lily to stick more than her head in, but, had things gone the way she'd planned, it might have been where she slept every night. Especially if Kamikaze hadn't been as accommodating as she thought. Would she have had to give birth in this room if no one would accept her? The idea was terrifying to say the least. Her mother returned with some bread and water. Suddenly ravenous, Adriana didn't even try to be ladylike. "Slow down," Astrid said quietly as she tried to hang her daughter's sopping wet boots. "You need to keep it down." Adriana bobbed a shoulder, feeling awkward and discouraged. "Yeah." Astrid looked at her daughter for a moment before smiling fondly. "It gets better." Adriana raised an eyebrow. "You feel like everything on your inside wants to be on your outside right now. That's okay. Give it a few months and you won't be able to eat enough." Adriana groaned. "Then I'll be fat." Astrid laughed when there was a knock at the door and her father asked, "Is everybody decent in there?" Astrid flung the door open with a raised eyebrow. He hid a smirk and pulled a chair inside, gently closing the door behind him. Adriana felt Astrid sit down next to her. It was very quiet in that little room, the occasional footsteps on deck breaking the silence every so often. Adriana stared into her cup of water and, out of the corner of her eye, she could see Hiccup staring at a point just over her head, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke. "I need you to tell us what happened. Take as much time as you need to and as far back as you can think of. We need to know everything." Adriana asked weakly. "Yes. I need to hear it from you and, so I can know how to deal with him later." Adriana's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Hiccup shook his hands gently. "Don't worry about that. Let's just focus on you right now." Adriana thought back to the first time Brandine had kissed her. She was sure her parents didn't want to know of every little touch shared between them. She didn't know when exactly Brandine had decided that he wanted more from the relationship. Fiddling with her cup, she finally said, "A few months back, She felt a blush rise up her neck. They hadn't made out often, she certainly never talked about it. "We were kids once," Astrid said encouragingly. "We kissed plenty ourselves." Hiccup spared her mom a glance before looking back at her. "We didn't really make out often. Kisses were shared now and then. But I remember this one time he was more. I don't know how to describe it." Hiccup stiffened. "Eager?" "Yeah," Adriana nodded. "It was getting out of hand quickly and I said I wanted to slow down. But he said I was being boring and I had to trust him, that he had needs that I wasn't fulfilling." Her dad's face turned stony and she swallowed hard. "And what did you say to that?" Adriana frowned. "I didn't really understand what he meant at first. But that wasn't the only time he brought it up before." She stopped, staring at the floor. How was she going to say this? Anger bubbled in her chest at the memory. "He tricked me. Set up a barn all decorated like a surprise date or something. But he locked me in," and a thought occurred to her, the story unfolding quicker than she could process. "Well, I told him about the kiss with Eric. He didn't sound upset, but he said the only way to make tea up to him was to do it." Her parents were stiff in their seats. "I told him again that I wanted to wait for marriage. And then he started to get mad but cruel. He just..." Adriana huffed, wishing the various thoughts flying through her head would just come out easily and painlessly. What was strange was that this moment that she had revisited often in her dreams wasn't affecting her the way it usually was. Perhaps it was the relief of finally telling someone who could help. Or maybe she needed to just say the words. She wasn't sure. "I told him to stop and he didn't." "Take your time," Hiccup murmured. The more she thought, the more angry tears welled in her eyes. She didn't know how she did it, but she finally managed to explain what happened. She told them everything, how Brandine had chased her up the ladder, locked the doors, how she'd screamed for help and no one had come. How she'd begged him to stop and let her go, but he'd only smiled and done with her what he wanted. She was numb by the time she finished the story, a burden fallen from her shoulders she didn't realize she'd been carrying. It felt nice to let it go. But now they knew. She looked up at her parents, studying their expressions and trying to gauge their emotions. "I should have told you," she whispered. "But he threatened to hurt my friends if I did or do it again. That's why Cliff got sick, he put something in his drink." Her stomach twisted in knots at the memory. Hiccup dropped his head into his hands, fisting his hair. She instantly knew what was coming. Daddy, it's not your fault. He stiffened, his prosthetic squeaking. It's not. Why aren't you crying? Hiccup's head shot up, emotions bared on his face. Her heart broke for him in a second. I don't know. But it's not your fault. Hiccup shook his head bitterly. No, I was just off playing around in dragon races when he was playing around with you. Astrid stood and began to pace, her hands roaming from her braid to her hips to crossing against her chest. Her face began to splotch as anger overtook her features. Adriana glanced between her parents. If I ever get my hands on that piece of scum, I'll rip him to shreds. Astrid suddenly growled. Adriana swallowed, unsure how to react to the outburst. Her dad only blinked, staring at her with sorrowful eyes. He reached forward and held her face in his hands gently, like she might break. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Addie. Adriana leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck tightly. She hated hearing the apologies he continued to whisper, not because she blamed him, but because it wasn't his fault. He couldn't save her from everything, she had learned that a long time ago. She almost wished this could be the first traumatic experience she'd been through, but to an extent, this was what happened. Adriana got hurt, Dad felt guilty and blamed himself. She didn't want to go through this routine again. So she didn't blame him and allowed him to hold her tightly. She wanted to move on and figure out what to do next, but she still didn't want to lay the entire burden on him. He still didn't deserve that kind of stress. Regardless, she knew it was futile, he'd be stressed anyway. Now what? She whispered in his ear. Hiccup sighed heavily. I don't know. We'll figure it out. He pulled back and stared at the floorboards. I'm going to check on Lily, make sure that poultice is holding up. Why don't you get some sleep? Adriana instantly felt drowsy, the last 2 days' worth of exhaustion hitting her full force. She curled up on the sheets, allowing her dad to draw a second blanket over her. Astrid blew out the candle and opened the door. Hiccup bent over and kissed her forehead gently before following his wife out the door. She didn't fail to notice the hesitation in his step, as if he really didn't want to leave her alone. As soon as the door closed, she allowed herself a heavy sigh and fell into a deep sleep. Finn stared at the waves sloshing against the boat, twisting a piece of broken sail between his hands. After setting sail, he'd helped Snotlout, Horst and Gustav clean things up and fix the sails so they were more operable. Nearly an hour after leaving Rune behind, he'd run out of things to do and didn't feel like talking. His parents had been downstairs with his sister the entire time. On the one hand, he wanted to hear what was going on. On the other, he wanted nothing to do with it. The last 5 hours of his life had been spent worrying over his sister's safety. Now that she was safe and they were well on their way home, he wasn't sure he could handle any more stress for the day, at least not voluntarily. Zap lay on the deck next to Lily, whose leg was wrapped with thick cloth. He figured she'd be fine, but she wouldn't be able to walk very easily for a few days. The hardest part would be keeping her from scratching it. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Finn turned in time to see his dad step onto the deck, his face stony and pale. He walked over to Lily and checked the wraps, patting her on the leg wordlessly when she didn't fidget. Finn faced the water again when his father stood, not wishing to be caught staring and trying to gauge a reaction. He was surprised when Hiccup stood beside him on the dock, arms crossed tight against the railing. Finn spared a glance. His dad stared at the water unblinkingly, his expression tight and melancholy. They stood side by side for a few minutes, watching the waves and the stars twinkling above their heads. The other men stood on the other side of the ship while Horst steered, keeping their distance. So? Finn quietly drawled, tossing the sail into the ocean. What's the verdict? Hiccup didn't reply, still staring at the ocean. Finn frowned, unsure how to take the silence. Silence, especially coming from his dad, made him nervous, and when he got nervous he shut down. He didn't want to shut this down, he felt like he needed to know something, at least how the conversation went. And he knew what happened when his dad bottled things up. They didn't need any more explosions today. Dad. Hiccup stirred, shoving a hand through his hair. His brow was pinched in worry. You've got to give me something. I don't. Finn waved a hand around, fumbling. I don't want details. I just don't know what's true or what's. It's true. Hiccup said finally, voice low and hollow. All of it is true. Finn's heart plummeted. His sister had been raped. She was pregnant. And none of them had known. Hiccup shoved his hands into his hair, shoulders shaking. Finn's heart twisted, hating how much his dad blamed himself for his kids' tortures, hating Brandine for daring to touch his sister, hating how helpless and fearful he felt inside because he could do nothing to make this better. The strongest man he knew was being reduced to tears, and he was completely speechless. Finn reached over and slung an arm over his dad's shoulders, squeezing tight. There was nothing he could say. Chapter 15, Transition. Chapter text. Eric couldn't sleep that night. After pacing so much he nearly wore out the floor, he had a small dinner of a half-stale loaf of bread and water before turning in early that night. Cliff had watched him, trying to read a book but obviously distracted. The boys had barely said 2 words to each other as the storm raged on that night. Now, Eric was restless. He tossed and turned, trying to relax his mind enough to fall asleep so that morning would come faster and, with it, news. It was useless. Instead, he spent the night worrying and wondering if he would find out the next morning that his best friend had either died or disappeared completely. Morning broke after agonizing hour and Eric finally decided to get up and dress for work. He knew he would be early by several hours but he didn't care. Having something to do with his hands would be preferable to lying in bed listening to the terrible terrors chirping. As he walked into the village, he felt the atmosphere change. He wasn't sure what it was but it felt different somehow. And not in a good way. Perhaps it was the fact that no one would look at him for longer than a second. Or perhaps he was being paranoid. After a sleepless night, he would need a cup of coffee from the Great Hall, even though he hated the stuff. But the Great Hall was filled with the same uncomfortable vibe he had received the second he stepped out of his house. As he headed to the drink table, he felt many pairs of eyes on his back. Recklessness from his worry and resultant sleepless night tempted him to spin around and shout what, to the crowd. He resisted the urge with difficulty as he added sugar to his coffee. "How dare you show your face here?" hissed a voice close behind him. Eric jumped and nearly spilled his coffee. He turned around and was face to face with his mother. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feeling a growing unease. "Everyone knows your secret, Eric. Everyone. How could you? What possessed you to do something so reckless, so inconsiderate, so disgusting? I don't know what you're." Slap. The sound reverberated around the hall. Eric felt a stinging sensation on his cheek as his mother shook off her hand. "Don't play stupid, Eric Noah Larson. I didn't raise you to act like this. Okay, let's break this up." Taryn had apparently come to his rescue. She put her hands on his upper arms while glaring daggers at Lara. "He's leaving," Taryn said. "You don't have to slap him again." Lara exhaled through her nose and stormed back to her group of friends, looking murderous. "What's all this about?" Eric asked as Taryn steered him from the hall, clinging to his coffee. "Outside," said Taryn. "But just come outside and I'll explain it." Taryn practically yanked Eric through the big double doors and into the woods next to the hall. "Okay, what's going on?" Eric asked, slightly peeved. Taryn sighed, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "Eric, did you and Anna do anything? Define anything." "Just, the weirdest rumor surfaced yesterday and it's all over Burke and I wanted to run it by you first because I think it's ridiculous." Taryn bit her lip. Eric had never seen her look so uncomfortable. "Shoot. Well, there's no easy way to ask this, but is Anna going to have a baby?" Eric's stomach was twisting in knots. The whole town knew something but he wasn't sure what was worse, that he and Adriana had some illicit affair or the truth of how she actually got pregnant. At this point, the truth seemed the best option. "I'm so sorry, Annie," he thought as he took a deep breath. "It's half true." Eric sighed. "Annie's pregnant. But it's not mine." Taryn stared at him, mouth agape. It felt like Eric had betrayed Adriana all over again. Finally, she spoke. "What?" Eric rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, it's kind of a long story. Well, start from the beginning. Taryn said calmly. She was taking this a lot better than he thought she would. Eric sighed. It shouldn't have happened at all. Taryn took a step forward, her shocked expression melting into a compassionate one. If Anna is pregnant, the truth will come out. Better to hear it sooner rather than later so I can help spread it around. Eric put his head in his hands. He felt decades older. You're right. Gods, it's disgusting. The worst moment of Annie's life having to be outed so we can avoid public humiliation. He swallowed thickly but his mouth still felt bone dry. Brandine didn't just disappear. Annie made him leave because he raped her. Taryn's hands flew to her mouth. Oh my gods. She didn't want to tell anyone. She didn't even tell me, and that's not why I punched him either. I suspected he was bad news but this. Never this. Nobody did, not even her. But, we knew him. How did we not see this? Taryn frowned, apparently thinking back over the time Brandine had been part of their little group. Worse. Eric mumbled. What could be worse, she asked, though her expression made it clear that she did not want to know the answer. Remember when Cliff was poisoned? That was him too. He tried to silence her. Make sure she knew that if she told anyone what he did, someone she loved would pay. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Taryn still had her hands over her mouth. Eric crossed his arms so he wouldn't be tempted to fidget. We couldn't have known. That's the thing, Eric. Taryn snapped, raising her voice for the first time since they had started speaking. We all thought Brandine was strange around her. Things like that shouldn't happen here. I know. Eric said through gritted teeth, trying to shut her down, at least for now. No one blames themselves more than her family. But we can't get too emotional about this. That's the last thing they need right now. Taryn quieted for a moment. She crossed her arms. So now what? Now we wait. Eric said softly. Wait for her to come back or news. Why did she leave? Taryn ventured timidly. She thought Hiccup and Astrid would want her to. I guess she didn't want that conversation with them. Eric looked down at his shoes. I have no idea if they found her but I hope they did because, never mind. Taryn looked at him in a compassionate manner before putting her arm around his shoulders. It's been a long night for you, hasn't it? The longest. Eric mumbled. I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to Magnus's. She should be set straight too before this gets even more out of hand. Eric shuffled off, hands in his pockets. He didn't think he could possibly feel worse than he had last night. But, as was typical of his life, he felt like he had been kicked in the stomach once more. Looking upward at the sky, he silently prayed that nothing more would happen. Adriana felt a tightness in her stomach as the shores of Berk appeared on the horizon. Having napped and eaten, she did feel quite a bit better, but that didn't stop her insides from squirming at the thought of returning home. She knew that she would be a pariah before long, an outcast in her own home if people didn't find out the truth about how this whole mess had begun. But, she reminded herself, no one knew about it yet. Small comfort. But a comfort nonetheless. She wandered forward and leaned against the side of the ship, sighing deeply. You okay? Hiccup asked, joining her next to the side. Anxious, said Adriana. A part of me thinks I had the right idea all along. Hiccup reached over and put a hand on her back. You'll be fine. I promise. You can't promise that. Funny, because I just did. Hiccup rubbed her back once, looking at her with a partial smile. We'll figure it out. We always do. Even if we stumble through a lot of the time. This is a baby. Adriana's gaze flitted to her stomach. It's not like anything we've gone through. Usually we have one less person when crap happens, not one more. Hiccup pulled her close to him as Berk's horizon came into clearer view. I still think we're going to be okay. I hope so. Adriana rested her head against Hiccup's upper arm. As they watched Berk approach, Adriana marveled at the fact that, somehow, she wasn't seasick. Given the amount of nausea she had suffered beforehand, this was a welcome change. Perhaps it was a sign of the gods that things would be okay. That life would continue normally, or as normally as it could with a baby on the way. As soon as they docked, Adriana realized just how very wrong she was. She thought the few fishermen she saw were just in exceptionally sour moods as she stepped off the gangplank. Hiccup and Astrid walked alongside her up to the village, their hands on her back in a protective manner. As soon as the little village came into view, Adriana felt like shriveling up and dying right there. The looks she received were like none she'd ever seen before. Parents picked up their young children and carried them away. Shopkeepers' expressions soured and locked onto her like she'd grown a hideous extra head. Lara Larson looked downright scandalized. "I don't like this," Adriana mumbled, faltering slightly. Astrid frowned. "Me neither." They walked through the town in near silence. It was like someone had pressed a button and removed all sound from the town, save for a few twigs snapping at elevated volume beneath Toothless' feet. As they approached the hill leading to their house, they caught sight of Eric and Cliff bolting over from what appeared to be in front of Magnus's house. Eric reached them first and threw his arms around Adriana. "You're back," he breathed, more to himself than to her. "Thank Thor." Adriana found herself tearing up, much to her irritation. "I'm fine," she muttered. "I'm sorry for running off." "You're okay?" he asked softly. "Fine." Adriana definitely didn't feel like talking, but feeling his racing heartbeat under his shirt made her feel extremely guilty. Eric finally let go, rubbing her upper arm in a comforting manner before turning to her parents. "We've got a problem," Joy said Hiccup shortly. Astrid gave her husband a look before looking back at Eric. "What's the problem?" "It'll take a while to explain," Cliff said, speaking up at last. "Might want to head home for this. I think you've done enough." Hiccup gave them an entirely uncharacteristic scowl before pushing past them, his arm clamped around his daughter's shoulders. The four remaining watched as Hiccup and Adriana ascended the hill for a while, all rather lost for words. "Better get this over with," Eric mumbled before leading them toward the Haddock home. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." "Well, this has been a fantastic week then." Hiccup paced back and forth on his porch, the news of the rumor still fresh in his mind. Astrid watched him for a moment before speaking up. "How did the news get out?" Eric shrugged. "I have no idea. And I really don't know how people thought I did it." "We didn't tell anyone." Cliff piped up. "Honest, Chief. I didn't say a word." "I hate to say it, but I believe you," Hiccup said through gritted teeth. "If you'd blabbed, at least the story would be more accurate." Eric had a sudden urge to voice a sarcastic remark, but he swallowed it. No need to make Hiccup even angrier. Hiccup continued pacing for a few seconds more before stopping and running his hands through his hair. "I can't deal with this right now," he sighed. I just want to tend to my daughter. She's more important right now. I'll deal with this later, when I know she's okay." "Go get Mara," Astrid told the boys. "Adri hasn't been examined yet and we should make sure she's really okay." Hiccup swallowed thickly but nodded in agreement. They watched the boys leave the house and walk down the well-worn path for a few seconds before Hiccup grasped the doorknob. He followed Astrid inside, and before the door even closed, Adriana's voice broke the silence. "What happened?" Hiccup saw her standing at the foot of the stairs in new, more comfortable clothes. Her question flew out of his mind. His baby girl was pregnant. She was probably cold, which is why she was wearing her favorite woolen pants and sweater and slippers over her socks. She was looking at him expectantly, waiting for an answer to her question, and all he could see was his baby girl standing on the stairs like she always had, waiting for him. His heart twisted inside his chest. "It doesn't matter," he gently ushered her back up the stairs, Astrid brushing past them to quickly clean up her room. "Yes it does." "They didn't sound okay," Adriana insisted. "If something happened when we were gone, then we need help." "Addie. Please," Hiccup said quietly, hugging her to his chest. He held her there, trying to stay together and convince himself that she was all right. They'd found her, she was home now. It did nothing to calm the pounding in his chest. "You're the only thing that's important right now." "I'm not the only person here," Adriana mumbled, Hiccup kissed her temple and sighed. You are to me. I'll tell you later, but not right now. Okay. A knock at the door sounded and Hiccup stepped back, holding his hands on her shoulders. I'll be right back. Adriana watched him nervously, which made his chest hurt. He hated seeing her nervous, almost as if she knew what was coming. Who is it? Hiccup turned and walked down the stairs. He wordlessly let Mara inside, who stood on the threshold with a concerned expression. Hiccup, tell me it isn't true. Hiccup gritted his teeth, fighting the emotions rampaging in his chest. His response only came through a whisper. It was Brandine. Mara held his eye for nearly a minute before understanding washed over her face. She held out her arms and pulled him into a tight hug. Hiccup swallowed hard, still fighting his emotions. After a moment, Mara pulled back, her expression firm. All right. Hiccup nodded. All right. Let's see then. Mara walked up the stairs, but halfway up, Hiccup found his voice. Mara, how did you get here so fast? I was on my way over and then Eric flew me the rest of the way on charger. Hiccup nodded and began to follow her up the stairs. It might be best if you remain downstairs, Mara instructed. Hiccup paused and nodded in agreement. He watched Mara disappear upstairs and heard quiet voices before his daughter's bedroom door closed. Feeling a bit lost, he turned and sat down on the couch. However, within a minute he was pacing around the room again as he waited for the women to return. The front door suddenly opened and Finn swept in, pushing the door closed with his back and sighing heavily. He looked over, exhaustion all over this face. He glanced upstairs and seemed to know what was happening. Hiccup noticed the dried blood covering his son's new suit. Need help washing that? Finn looked down and straightened. Oh. No, that's okay. I'll do it later. Hiccup nodded and silence overtook the house again. He could hear Finn breathing from the doorway and could tell he was uncomfortable and unsure. Nearly a minute later, Finn asked, should I leave? Hiccup shrugged. It's up to you, Finn. It would probably be best if you heard the results. Finn nodded. Did you hear about the rumor? Yes. I guess we'll deal with that later then. Yeah. It seemed like an eternity before finally Adriana's door opened and Astrid and Mara came downstairs. Astrid moved into the washroom and called Stormfly in from outside to help heat the water. Mara waited patiently for her to return before speaking. I believe she's around 6 weeks along. Air blew past Finn's lips as he looked away. Hiccup equally felt the air squeeze out of his chest. She seems to be alright though. A little cold and I want her consistently drinking and eating more, even if it is difficult. She's a little malnourished. But if we keep an eye on her, everything should turn out alright. Alright. Finn turned with a sardonic smirk on his face. How is any of this alright? Finn, please. Astrid said. This is hard for all of us. Right. How selfish of me. Finn walked across the room, snatching a shirt out of a basket of unfolded laundry and pushed out the back door. Give him time, Mara said. While his feelings are important, he's not the priority right now. Hiccup inhaled and exhaled shakily. So what do we do now? Mara gave him a small smile. You have a baby. This will be difficult and hard to deal with, but luckily she has 2 loving, experienced parents, good friends who care about her. Everything will be alright. Soft footfalls padded from the upstairs before Adriana came down, wrapped in a robe and carrying a towel. She ignored eye contact as she ducked into the washroom and closed the door firmly behind her. Mara lowered her voice. I'll come by to talk to her more tomorrow. We need to make sure she rests plenty the next few days to recollect her strength. The parents nodded as she grabbed her things and moved toward the door. One day at a time, Haddocks. One day at a time. The house was silent for a few minutes before Astrid slumped with a heavy sigh. She looked mentally and physically exhausted. Hiccup watched her, wanting to say something but unsure if anything he could say would make a difference. She looked up at him and held out her arms, longing for a hug. Hiccup pulled her into his chest, allowing her to wrap her arms around him tightly. No words could be said. They could only grieve together for their failed efforts to protect their daughter's innocence. I hate Mondays. Vidar. Yeah. Today's Thursday. Oh, meh. On any normal day, Finn might have found this exchange between his mentor and young trainee humorous. Not today. Instead, he scowled and continued sharpening his pile of dull weapons. Finn also wished the week would end. A tightness in his shoulders had appeared late last night from all the stress he'd endured the last day. He could only imagine what his parents were feeling. Less than 24 hours ago he'd left Burke with his parents on a hunt to find his sister. After hours of paranoid flight, especially after finding the ship remains in the ocean, they'd tracked her to his second least favorite island in the archipelago, Rune. He couldn't believe it. Rune. Rune. Of all the places she had to go. Even if it was an accident, what would possess her to even set foot on that island? She should have turned tail and fled while she had the chance. There were plenty of foul people in that place. She should have known what might happen, especially given her condition. The idea blew his mind. His sister was pregnant. Never in his wildest dreams, and he'd had some pretty wild dreams, did he ever think his sister would be pregnant before she was married. She'd always wanted to be a mom, though obviously not like this. The idea made his stomach twist in knots and his expression tighten in anger. One day he'd find Brandine and make him pay for this. Finn hadn't felt this kind of wrath since Eric turned him in for the gang. That kind of wrath had been completely unjustified, he'd been way out of line. But this. The idea that Brandine had played them all for fools and stepped way over the line by ever touching his sister made him sick. But the reality was this, he'd worked with Brandine every day, standing in this exact same spot, goofing off and throwing jokes and rags at Gobber and wrestling in the back room, and Finn, in all his stupidity and cluelessness, bought into all of it like they were real friends. The sword he was sharpening slipped across the stone wheel and sliced down his wrist. Finn bit back a curse and dropped the sword, holding his arm to his chest with heavy breaths. He didn't need to look down to see the damage, blood was already soaking through his shirt. All right, let me see. Gobber hobbled over. Finn stepped back with a growl. I'm fine. Now see here, Gobber said sternly. You're bleeding like an overturned yak trough. Let me see. Finn huffed and held out his arm. Vidar, hand me the cleanest rag you can find. Vidar bustled around the shop for a minute before running back, a white cloth in his hands. He stared up at Finn with wide eyes, glancing between his face and his bleeding arm. Gobber swiftly wrapped the wound as tightly as the fabric would allow. Right then. Go to Morris, get that stitched up, then take the rest of the day off. What? Finn asked incredulously. There's too much work to do. And I can't have yellows and limbs because you're too stressed to focus. It's just a scratch, Gobber. Tell that to your shirt. Gobber pointed. Listen lad, you've been glaring at everyone and everything all day. Just get your arm taken care of and then take some time for yourself. But. Don't worry about it, Finn. Vidar piped from his smaller-sized anvil. He looked like a super small snotlout with his dark hair sticking out in all directions and lopsided grin. Maybe we'll work double time and you won't have to come to work tomorrow either. Finn frowned, unsure. Finally he huffed, pressing his arm to his chest. Fine. A tar boy. Get to Morris quick now. Yeah. Finn stalked into the sunlight and crossed the square toward Morris' house, muttering under his breath as he went. Glancing down at his arm, he winced. Blood was already soaking the cloth. He waited for a cart and a couple nadders to move past before he finally made it to the door. He closed the door with his boot and looked around. Most of the interior doors were closed. Mara's medicine cabinet was open in the corner where she kept most of her supplies. A rustling movement caught his eye before Inga emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her pants. She paused, her eyebrows shooting to her hairline. Gods, what happened to you? Sword. Finn frowned. Is Mara here? Nope. Inga waved him forward. The Blake children have the flu, so she went to give them medicine. I can look at it. Finn walked over to the work area, looking at all the labeled bottles of medicine in the cabinet. He vaguely noticed his boots interrupting the quiet of the room. Are you sure? Of course, when am I ever not sure? Inga smirked and pulled him into a chair from the back of his shirt. Let me see. Holding out his arm, Finn watched as Inga cut away the cloth and inspected the cut. Fresh blood dripped out onto the protective cloth layer on the table. Well, that's a good 4 inches. Yeah. At least it's a straight cut. Inga said, quickly washing her hands and getting a needle and thread. Easy fix. Have you done this before? Finn asked, ignoring his blooded forearm. Why Finn, I never knew you to be so fearful. What? I'm not afraid. We should get that name changed as soon as possible. Hey. Also, doubting my abilities. Rude. Where would you be without me right now? Would you shut up? You'd be bleeding to death on the front porch, that's where. Finn laughed, allowing her to turn his palm up so she could begin the stitching process. Inga's smirk wobbled, like she was fighting laughter herself. One day, you'll be the death of me. You know it. Inga grinned. I'm the only one who can keep up with you. He breathed an easy laugh, but inwardly he was surprised at the truth in the statement. Not many people could match Finn in wit and sarcastic humor. Excluding his family, the only other person he could think of was Brandine. His smile fell and he looked at the floor while Inga stitched his arm. She noticed his change of mood, glancing up at him concernedly. So how'd this really happen? Finn raised an eyebrow. I told you. Sword. Yeah, but working out with it or working with it? Slipped on the sharpener. Inga nodded, her lips in a perfect O shape. Nice. I wasn't paying attention. Inga hummed. Finn decided to watch her work, ignoring the stinging pain of the needle piercing his skin around the cut and focusing on her hands. With a jolt, he noticed how small her hands and arms were compared to his. He had to remind himself that she was only 13. It was a strange realization, she felt older, somehow. He stole a look at her just in time to catch her sticking her tongue out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. Her hair had grown out again too. He remembered when the fire had erupted near her home and she'd barely escaped with her life. She hadn't had one of her episodes since that day actually. You're scowling. Finn blinked. Yeah. Been doing that a lot lately. Why? Smiles look nicer on you. Finn dodged the flirty comment. He doubted she even realized just how flirty she could be. For most of their lives, they'd always teased and mocked each other and said stupid things. Now that he was older, he wondered if he was seeing a deeper meaning in her words, or if she was actually being obliviously obvious. Instead, he sighed. A lot on my mind I guess. Like your sister. Finn didn't reply, watching her work. Is it true then? He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. He didn't see her expression, this time, he was too afraid to look. Well. So was it. Inga paused. It wasn't Eric, if that's what you're going to ask. Oh, Inga sighed in relief, her shoulders slumping. Good. I mean, it sounded preposterous when I heard it. The idea. PSH. She paused, thinking. Wait, but that means. Brandine. Finn shifted in his chair, fighting a scowl. He didn't want to get angry in front of Inga. Not right now. Yeah. Inga frowned, finally pausing mid-stitch. What's wrong? I mean, it's obvious but. He wanted someone to talk to. He couldn't face Adriana right now, his parents were either confused or ready to torch the island. The last person he wanted to talk to was Eric. He needed to trust somebody. Inga, he raped her. Inga's eyes widened in shock. Finn shook his head and pushed his free hand into his hair, leaning into his palm. He didn't know if he wanted to yell or cry. He had too many emotions bottled up, which he knew was bad, but he didn't even know how to process all of this information. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to curl into a ball in his bed and hide under the covers. He wanted to chop every tree down in the woods and he wanted to fly away on Zap until all his worries went away. But none of that would make it go away. Inga's hand wrapped around his, careful of the thread still in his arm. I'm sorry. Do you need anything? Finn looked up at her through his bangs. He probably looked like a kicked puppy, but he couldn't mask his feelings anymore. Just someone to talk to. The warmest, most compassionate smile stretched across Inga's face. That I can do. Whenever you need me. Clenching his jaw and swallowing hard, he would not cry. Finn nodded and squeezed her hand. Thanks. Inga nodded and finished stitching his arm. Tying off the thread and putting all the blooded items in a bowl, she quickly cleaned her hands and brought back alcohol and some more cloths. This is the worst part. Ah, great. Finn frowned. He hissed through the pain, but had to admire her handiwork. He snorted, rolling his eyes. Inga raised an eyebrow. What? I was just admiring your handiwork. Inga frowned in confusion before giving him a long-suffering sigh. You're almost as bad as Cliff. Don't tell him I made a pun or he'll go insane. Finn smiled. Now Inga sniffed. I like the sound of silence. It will be our little secret. How generous of you. Inga quickly wrapped his wrist with white cloth and closed it with a few pins. Okay, you won't be able to use that for work for at least 8 to 10 days. Finn gaped. 8 to 10. Not like 3 or 4. Palms up, Inga shrugged. Not my fault you had to be stupid. He sighed heavily. I guess you're right. Man, I am going to be bored. Think of it as a nice vacation. Not my thing. You'd be surprised how nice they can be. Ha, yeah. I've had enough surprises for a lifetime, I think. Inga nodded in agreement. So where did you guys find her? Finn scowled, gingerly flexing his fingers in the cast. Rune. Well. Why did she go there? I guess she was trying to get to Bog. Wrong direction. I know. The storm blew her off course. Finn said, looking down. I hate that place. Inga remained quiet for a moment, a curious expression on her face. Like she wanted to ask a question but was afraid to say it out loud. What? He asked inquisitively. Why do you hate Rune? Inga asked slowly. Finn blinked in surprise. You don't know. I don't know, I have a few guesses. Inga shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I never wanted to ask because if I'm right, well, I know you wouldn't want to talk about it if I was right. So she didn't know the details after all. Their parents being lifelong friends, Finn always assumed that the Jorgensens knew about his past enslavement. He felt appreciative that they hadn't shared that information with their children. I don't talk about it. Finn agreed quietly, looking at the floor. That's where. He'd never talked about this with anyone outside his parents, including Benin. Especially Benin. Not Helga or Eric or Cliff or even his sister. Carrying a burden like this was exhausting and he'd never trusted a friend with this before. He wasn't sure about his feelings with Inga yet, but he did want to trust her as a friend. That's where they made me a slave. Blue eyes locked on Blue. He wasn't sure what to expect, confusion, shock, pity. Inga's eyebrows furrowed for a second before she nodded, almost like a confirmation. How did you know? She shrugged. I didn't. I just kind of figured it out. And Inga stopped talking, twisting her fingers in her lap. What? There's a long scar on the back of your neck. Inga said quietly. I always wondered how you'd gotten it. I asked Adriana about it a while back and she said not to ask. But it wasn't good. Finn rubbed the back of his neck, feeling for a scar. He could feel it moving diagonally across his skin. Inga probably didn't know that it ended a few inches under his shirt. Many of the scars had faded over the years. But a few stripes still marked his body from Ratri's cane. I'm sorry, Inga blurted. I shouldn't have asked. It's okay, Finn said honestly. Really? I haven't talked about it with anyone since Benin. Was he? Yeah. He was a slave most of his life. Most people thought so. Inga smiled a little. Even with all that, he was still a good man. Finn smiled. Yeah, he was. He'd never stopped missing the sweet old man. There was a great amount of compassion and kindness that flowed from his warm smile and twinkling blue eyes. Weathered skin and fraying hair couldn't slow him down, he'd had too much work to do. The best part was that he did it of his own free will. Freedom. Finn tried not to take that for granted. He'd experienced the world's cruelty. He never wanted to experience that again. But his heart twisted even more for the people out there who weren't as lucky as he was. How many men, women and children were being subjugated to that kind of inhumane cruelty without even a day of freedom? The thought overwhelmed him. Right before we left Rune with Anna, Finn said quietly. I saw the man who sold me. Inga's brow furrowed, lips puckered with distaste. He was talking to a couple little boys down the street. Finn's lip curled in disgust, remembering the image from the day before. He was still wearing that purple coat with his money bags tied to his belt, talking to those kids in that false cheerful voice. Probably offering them food and shelter, just to drag them off to the nearest slave ship. The room was quiet, images flashing in his mind in the silence. He blinked and looked up at Inga, who was staring at him. I wish I could do something, Inga. Finn whispered. But I'm still just a kid. I can't do anything for them. Inga leaned forward and flicked his wrapped arm. Ow. Finn pouted. Not yet, you can't. Inga said firmly. But maybe someday you can round up every slave trader and free every single slave. Finn laughed under his breath. I'll be old and grey before every single slave is freed. Inga smiled and shrugged. Then let your kids carry on the mission. Let that be your legacy. Nobody should live every day of their life in submission to evil people like that, especially when they can't help themselves. So they need someone strong and smart to help them. I can't really help them though. Finn said. I'm physically strong, but that's not going to help them. Ending slavery would probably take a war. I don't have the manpower for that. How could I possibly force slave traders to stop? Inga frowned in thought. Maybe you don't need to force them to do anything. Maybe all you need is someone to inspire the people who've been enslaved. Someone who understands what it's like to be them. Maybe that's all it would take for them to rise up and take their freedom back. I mean, if slavery is as big as you think it is, then there would have to be some serious numbers, right? Yeah, but a lot of those slaves are kids, Inga. Not everyone is fit for battle, especially when they live every day being abused. And I don't know where we'd find someone to lead them. Inga raised her eyebrow at that. What? I was referring to you when I said that. He stared at her in surprise. Me? Inga blinked and sat back in her seat. At least, that's what I'd tell you to do. You know, if you wanted my insight. Finn felt his chest swell in a way he couldn't place. He still didn't think he'd ever be able to help the slaves. That task seemed insurmountable. But the confidence instilled in Inga's voice was a little more than inspiring. She was genuinely confident that he could do something one day. You really think so? Inga nodded. You may be a complete bonehead sometimes, but people listen to you. You're a lot like your dad. Finn leaned forward on the table. Yeah. Don't let it go to your head, stupid. You've got a long way to go before you're as awesome as him. Ouch, Finn gasped, a hand to his chest. You wound me. See? Bonehead. I am not. I've been too nice in this conversation. Clearly you can't handle it. I quite enjoy it actually. Inga's eyes widened in surprise for a moment as she floundered for a comeback. Finn laughed, loving it when he could catch her off guard. Oh, go jump off a cliff, fearless Finn. Can I take Zap with me? Absolutely not. Inga snapped. Finn didn't know why he did it, but he suddenly reached out with a finger and poked her in the ribs, making her jump. Her chair screeched against the floorboards in her haste to back away. He couldn't fight the grin. Is somebody ticklish? Don't. You. Dare. Inga whispered dangerously. Or I will hack off your arm with a paring knife and forbid everyone on this island from giving you a prosthetic and everyone will call you Stumpy. Finn covered his mouth with a hand to keep in the snickers. Stumpy. I believe we have a new nickname for you, Finn the Stumpy. You are truly a terrible person. Finn grabbed a roll of cloth and threw it at her. Inga caught it effortless and pointed at him. Hey, I worked hard on those stitches. Don't tear them. If I did, I'd have more of a reason to stick around though. Her eyes widened in surprise, once again caught off guard and one come back short. Finn smiled innocently. Right. Come on, you clearly enjoy my company. Inga narrowed her eyes and threw the roll of cloth. It bounced off his forehead and rolled across the floor. You're not allowed to use yourself as a weapon against me. Why? Because it's not fair. Why? Because you can't just shut up, Finn. Finn grinned, turning towards the front door as it swung open. He waved at Mara with his bad hand as she stepped inside. Inga nearly jumped out of her chair. Mara. You're back. Hi Mara, Finn waved again. What happened to you, Finn? Cut myself on a sword. Good job. Mara hung up her bags and turned toward Inga, who was suddenly scurrying around the room. Inga, did you finish those poultices? Inga turned sheepishly. No, I guess I got distracted after stitching him up. Mara raised an eyebrow, glancing at Finn. Finn winced and stood. Sorry. I should have left a while ago. No, it's okay. Inga stopped, as if remembering her boss had returned and was standing right beside her. It's cool. Now I'm scray so I can catch up. Finn snickered. Okay. See you later, Inga. Wait, Mara said as he reached the door. He turned back with a surprised look. Inga didn't stop pulling jars and bowls out of the cabinets. How many stitches? 5, Inga said as she worked, grinding up spices. There was one more than I thought he needed. So you won't be working for almost 2 weeks? Mara instructed. Finn nodded. Yeah, that's what Inga said. So in the meantime, why don't you come by in the mornings and we can teach you a thing or two about healing? Mara asked. What? Finn and Inga asked together. Oh sure, Mara nodded, turning and pulling more bowls out of a cabinet. You'll be chief one day and it would be wise to know more than general healing skills. Don't you think? Finn nodded in agreement, surprised at the offer. Why was Mara doing this? Besides, Mara smiled. If you'll be coming around more often anyway, then I suppose it would be easier to keep an eye on you. Inga tensed at the cabinet, her arm slowing to a stop. Finn frowned, puzzled. Because of the stitches? Mara's smirk was devilish. Both of you. The deeper meaning behind her words hit him square in the chest. Mara thought he liked Inga and that's really why he'd come here today. Sure, he'd really needed stitches, but did she think that he'd start coming by every day just so he could talk to Inga more often? Did she think he could